Hi everyone. Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now, let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. The dusky light of early morning barely pierced through the towering pines that surrounded the hidden clearing. In that veil of dim illumination, Lilia stood with her arms clasped around her middle, heart pounding as if it might burst at any moment. The grand feast of the previous night still echoed in her mind, fresh and painful. The entire pack had been present in the large timber hall, every wolf from the youngest pup to the most senior elder, all there to celebrate what was supposed to be a momentous announcement for the leadership. When the alpha, Aric, had summoned her to the center of that gathering, she had known something significant was about to unfold. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that her life in the pack might take a turn toward acceptance. Despite her low rank, she had never lost the yearning to prove her worth. Yet on that night, when Aric's gaze landed on her, there was no warmth in those stormy silver-gray eyes. Instead, she had seen only contempt. He had paused for effect, scanning the sea of faces in front of him before speaking, his words echoing against the wooden rafters like a thunderclap. He declared that he had found his mate, but his voice lacked any tenderness or anticipation. His next sentences had fallen like a blade across her world. He rejected Lalia, naming her unworthy of him and the pack. Worse still, he questioned the bond the moon goddess had forged, claiming that such a weak and insignificant she-wolf could not possibly be destined to stand at his side. The crowd watched in a stunned hush, with a few letting out hushed gasps. But most simply accepted his judgment without challenge. For Aric was not only their alpha but also a man whose temper was legendary. No one dared risk his fury. Those same events had followed Lalia into the earliest hours of morning. Stumbling through the forest with tears burning tracks down her cheeks, she had tried to reconcile how the fates could be so cruel. She had always believed deeply in the tradition that the moon goddess chose mates for a purpose. She had clung to the idea that if fate declared her the alpha's mate, then perhaps she wasn't as small and insignificant as everyone claimed. Yet that fragile hope had shattered beneath Aric's scathing words. What cut deeper still was the glimmer of doubt she had seen reflected in the eyes of the beta, Nadia. The usually kind-hearted beta, who had often offered Lalia a small smile in the pack house corridors, stood in silence when Aric's pronouncement came. Nadia's compassion flickered as if uncertain whether to pity Lalia or believe the alpha's reasoning that the moon goddess had made a mistake. Even the occasional friend who had whispered encouraging words to Lalia in the past averted their gaze, unwilling to challenge the top of the pack hierarchy. Out in the cold forest, Lalia felt her cheeks flush anew as she remembered Aric's sneer. He had told her in front of everyone that an alpha deserved a mate who was strong, bold, and proud. Her hair, the color of faded autumn leaves, hung limp around her shoulders, and her slender frame spoke little of the strength revered by the pack. She recalled him using that phrase, "You have a spine of glass," and the onlookers stifled their shock. She had tried to stand her ground, but everything about that moment had conspired to undermine her. Her voice, trembling and quiet, couldn't rise over the thunderous dismissal from her mate, or the male who should have been her mate, if only he had believed in the goddess's design. To reject a mate was a brutal act in werewolf tradition, one that many considered a curse upon the pack and the wolves involved. She had never heard of an alpha doing it so callously, so publicly. In the seclusion of the forest, Lalia's tears finally slowed, leaving a hollow sting in her chest. She was alone, stripped of her dignity. A werewolf without her mate, her pack, or a place to call home. Everything in her yearned to run back, to shout at Aric, to prove to him that she could be so much more than he imagined, that she could learn to be strong. But what could she do? She had no power. She had never been one of the fighters. While others trained to hone their claws and fangs, she had been assigned to menial tasks like cleaning, cooking, or gathering herbs for the healers. The only gift she seemed to possess was an intuitive empathy that allowed her to sense the emotional states of others. But that was often considered a weakness in a realm that prized brute strength and intimidation. The crisp scents of the pines and damp earth threatened to lull her into false comfort, but she felt something shift in the air. A faint rustle of leaves broke the stillness. Lalia lifted her eyes, scanning the tree line. At first, she saw nothing but shadows. Then a group of silhouettes emerged, stepping into the clearing. Nadia was there, flanked by 2 large pack warriors. In the center stood Aric, his shoulders squared and his jaw set with grim resolve. For a fleeting second, a surge of optimism made Lalia believe he had come to undo his cruelty, maybe to reconsider the rejection. Instead, he locked eyes with her, and she felt the weight of final judgment in his expression. Without waiting for her to speak, he raised a hand, halting her attempts to approach him. "You cannot remain in this pack," he said, voice echoing between the trees. "You have no place at my side. The bond is an error," he continued, ignoring the startled flinch in Nadia's eyes. "If the moon goddess saw fit to tie us together, then I must defy her." Those words struck like a physical blow to Lalia's core. She tried to speak, but all that emerged was a choked whisper. She looked around for any flicker of mercy. Nadia's posture was tense. It seemed the beta struggled with the alpha's decree, but no one dared defy Aric's decision. He was absolute. The pack obeyed him, and she was isolated by the decree of the very man the goddess had supposedly chosen for her. She heard a low growl from one of the warriors, and her instincts screamed that this confrontation was about to escalate beyond mere words. Fear coiled in her stomach. She realized that Aric's cold, calculating gaze was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Unwilling to turn her back, but knowing she stood no chance against 3 seasoned fighters, she took a step back, trying to keep them all in sight. Aric nodded toward the warriors, a silent command passing between them. Lalia's breath caught in her throat. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if it too were waiting to see whether the alpha would truly do something irrevocable. In a flash of movement, the first warrior lunged. Panic seized Lalia. She shifted swiftly into her wolf form, hoping her smaller shape might at least outmaneuver them. However, no amount of agility or speed would be enough against the raw might of well-trained enforcers. They circled her, snarling, their eyes glowing with savage intent. When she tried to bolt to the left, the second warrior cut her off, swiping with lethal claws that grazed her shoulder. She yelped, the sting of pain igniting a desperate will to survive. Her heart hammered wildly, each pulse pounding in her ears. She attempted to dart between the black trunks, searching for an escape route, but the warriors herded her back toward the clearing. It was as though they had orchestrated this dance of violence countless times before, driving prey to a dead end. Lalia's wolf could feel the bond, that faint spark that should have connected her to Aric, but it was overshadowed by a suffocating sense of dread. The savage reality of the rejection sank in with horrifying clarity. The alpha might actually kill her. A swirl of autumn leaves kicked up by their movements added a surreal backdrop to her final stand. She tried in vain to protect herself, but fang and claw tore through her defenses. One of the warriors pinned her to the ground, the weight of his paw pressing her muzzle into the damp earth. She struggled, whimpering under the crushing force. That was when Aric stepped closer. Lalia's eyes met his. For just an instant she saw a flicker, an internal battle behind the mask of ruthless authority. But then, as if burning away any lingering hesitation, he turned cold again. He delivered the final order. A sickening snap filled the clearing as sharp teeth sank into her throat. Agony erupted, and a hoarse cry died in her gurgling throat. In her final conscious moment, she felt Aric's aura wash over the clearing, a heavy wave of dominance suffocating all. Nadia, though trembling at the periphery, said nothing. The trail took on a new, visceral meaning. Even as blood soaked the leaves, the last coherent thought in Lalia's mind was a devastated, "Why? Why would my mate do this to me?" Then, amid the agony, darkness claimed her. When Lalia opened her eyes again, she found herself surrounded by a soft, milky haze. Confusion warred with alarm. The pain in her body was gone, and she sensed no cold or heat. For a moment, she wondered if she had awakened in the pack infirmary, saved at the last second. But an otherworldly glow enveloped her, shifting like moonlight incarnate. She glimpsed shapes that might have been wisps of cloud or spirits drifting at the edges of her vision. The air around her felt alive, pulsing with a gentle hum that resonated deep in her chest. Slowly, she realized she wasn't breathing in the usual sense. This place, wherever it was, needed no oxygen or heartbeat to sustain her. Fear and awe mingled in her thoughts. She tried to speak, but her voice formed only an echo that reverberated silently, never reaching her own ears. In the distance, a radiant figure emerged, shifting between lupine and humanoid outlines as it drew closer. Lalia felt her entire being quiver, as though it recognized the presence of a deity. She knew who it had to be. The moon goddess, the one who presided over the destiny of werewolves, the one said to orchestrate the sacred bond of mates. The figure's light enveloped Lalia in a glow of compassion and solemn promise. "You have suffered greatly." The voice resonated in her mind, neither male nor female, but pure and resonant. "Your mate has done the unthinkable by rejecting not just you, but the will of the goddess." Lalia trembled, tears of sorrow and confusion pouring from her eyes. She felt herself kneeling, her spirit overwhelmed by the presence. A deep grief pulsed within her as she recalled the pain of betrayal, the sensation of claws and fangs ripping her life away. Yet, in this realm of luminous calm, no physical agony touched her. "I will not let your story end in such tragedy," the voice continued, wrapping around Lalia like a comforting embrace. "Your destiny is not yet fulfilled." Lalia tried to formulate a question. Why? Or how? But the intangible presence sensed her turmoil. "You carry an unrecognized power," the goddess whispered, "a capability the Alpha neglected to see. You must return and walk the path I have shaped for you. But be warned, your renewal will come with a price. The depth of betrayal you have endured will not fade with a simple second breath. You must be reborn, stronger and colder. You must become untouchable. Only then can you fulfill what is written, and only then can the Alpha understand the weight of his choices. You will not be as you once were." Emotion crashed through Lalia in waves. To return from death was an impossible gift, but the mention of a cost and the chilling hint that she must be colder pricked at her conscience. She had always yearned for acceptance, for a place where she belonged. The goddess's words implied a future carved from a foundation of hurt. Yet, if there was any chance to claim the life ripped away from her, to find redemption or at least justice, she would seize it. She did not want her story to end in that lonely forest, her blood painting the leaves. Strengthened by renewed resolve, she surrendered to the goddess's power. Light exploded within her, a surge of potent energy that washed away the faint, milky haze. Suddenly, she felt a jolt, like a great cosmic heartbeat, and her consciousness was pulled from that realm. Time lost meaning for a while. Lalia floated in a state of murkiness, until a searing chill forced her eyes open. She inhaled sharply, lungs burning as if she had been underwater for far too long. Her body lay in a shallow grave, earthen walls pressing against her arms. She gasped in horror, scrambling to push away loose soil that blocked her movement. The weight of it triggered a primal panic. She twisted and clawed at the dirt until she finally spilled onto the forest floor. A moonlit night greeted her, though she had no idea how many nights had passed since she'd been left for dead. Breathing heavily, she rolled onto her back. Her clothing was tattered, caked with dried blood and soil, but her injuries were gone. No gaping wound in her throat, no bruises or slashes. She traced trembling fingers over her neck and found unbroken skin. Terror and disbelief wrestled with relief. She was alive, after being so certain she had died. The moon goddess had held true to her promise. Lalia rose slowly, scanning her surroundings. The forest was eerily silent, as though nature itself recoiled from her rebirth. She took a cautious step, feeling an unfamiliar power thrum through her veins. It was not simply her heartbeat. It was a deeper, more concentrated energy that coursed in her core. Before, she had always felt overshadowed by the stronger wolves in the pack, but now she sensed her own presence in the environment. She was different. She tried to shift into her wolf form. The transition, once awkward for her, was now seamless, painless even. Her wolf's side emerged in an instant, fur glistening in the silver moonlight. A sense of near invincibility hummed through her limbs. Her hearing and sense of smell sharpened drastically, more acute than ever before. She padded around the clearing, marveling at how the ground felt under her paws. But she remembered the moon goddess's words that she would return changed. As she tried to identify exactly what that meant, an unsettling calm enveloped her. The emotions that once gripped her so tightly, fear, sorrow, desperate longing, were now tempered by a steely clarity. She had been undone by her own vulnerability, and so she had been remade to feel no such fragility again. Not wanting to linger near her own grave, Lalia forced herself to shift back to human form. She peeled off the remnants of her clothing, which did little more than hang in tatters around her. Her mind whirled with questions. How would the pack react if they saw her standing here alive? Would they tear her apart a second time? She pressed her palm against a nearby tree to ground herself. She sensed the quiet pulse of nature, as if the forest recognized the significance of her rebirth. "I won't be their victim again," she whispered into the night. Her voice carried a new edge, a quiet determination that replaced the soft vulnerability she once wore like a target on her back. She gazed around, deciding that before she even thought of confronting the pack, she needed to understand the extent of her transformation. She also needed clothing, resources, and a plan. Her head still spun, but one conviction anchored her. She was no longer the weak she-wolf so easily cast aside. If Aric believed her worthless, then he would soon discover how mistaken he had been. She looked at the ground where the shallow grave had been disturbed by her frantic escape. A wave of something, anger, maybe, or a righteous fury, surged in her chest. It fueled her like a blazing flame, chasing away the last remnants of shock. The sensation was both empowering and unsettling. Had she given up a part of her empathy in this new form? She suspected that the sorrow and gentleness which once defined her had been tempered by something else, vengeful determination. She started walking, guided by moonlight filtering through the branches. Her steps felt unnervingly sure, as if she already knew the hidden paths of the forest. Animals seemed to sense her presence, scurrying out of sight. She recalled how, in the past, curious forest creatures didn't bother to hide when she approached, as though they recognized an unthreatening soul. Now, everything fled before her. In that realization, she felt the full weight of what her rebirth might entail. She had prayed for strength, but there was a loneliness in it. If the goddess had bestowed upon her a piece of divine power to stand on her own, it came packaged with the price of isolation. She pressed on, welcoming the brisk sting of the wind on her skin because it reminded her she was alive. She refused to let fear or regret dictate her next move. By the time she reached the far edge of the forest, where a small stream cut across the rocky ground, she had decided on a course of action. She would remain hidden and observe the pack from the periphery. She wanted to know how they were coping with the aftermath of her supposed death, whether her absence even mattered to them. She would reveal herself only when she chose, on her terms. She knelt by the stream to drink and rinsed the blood and dirt off her body. The moon was high overhead, reflecting like a gleaming silver coin on the rippling water. When Lalia finally set her gaze on the faint lights of the pack settlement in the distance, she felt something within her shift again. It wasn't the timid, heartbreak-stricken girl from before who looked upon those buildings, but a woman forged by betrayal. Her mind replayed the scene of Aric's stony face, the savage bite that tore her throat, and the surrounding warriors who didn't lift a single hand in protest. Even Nadia, with her momentary flicker of pity, had done nothing to stop the Alpha's decree. Lalia clenched her fists. The taste of betrayal on her tongue was like bitter iron, and it steeled her resolve. If she had to be a ghost walking among them, she would be one with purpose. She started planning where she could hide for the night, how she might obtain clothes without alerting anyone to her presence. She was aware that one mistake could result in alarmed pack members hunting her down. But she also recognized the advantage she now held. No one would be expecting a dead woman to walk into their midst. The sensation of that dark triumph was new, and it simultaneously thrilled and frightened her. She silently prayed that she could keep a shred of her old self beneath this new exterior. The wind rustled her tangled hair, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp bark, and she reminded herself that she had survived the unthinkable. That must mean something. She took a final glance at the silvery orb in the sky. This is my second chance, she thought. My path is mine to shape. I won't let them define me again. Then, ghost-like, she slipped deeper into the darkness, leaving the place of her death behind, determined to reclaim a future that had nearly been stolen forever. Sunrise over the pack's territory was a spectacle of russet and gold, each hue blending as if painted by divine hands. The forest canopy lit with a gentle glow, and birds trilled their songs to greet the day. But beneath that pristine facade, within the pack's settlement, tensions simmered like an undercurrent. It had been 3 days since Lalia's apparent death, and the pack's leadership had tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. The warriors still performed their patrols, hunters brought in fresh game, and life went on. Yet a rumor, too hushed to be called official news, circulated among pack members. The Alpha had done something that night in the forest, something that involved an unmarked grave. Speculation rippled through the ranks. Some said he'd exiled a traitor, others suspected he'd eliminated a threat. Still, no one had the full story. Even so, a pall clung to everyone's spirits, a vague discomfort that no one could properly name. Lalia watched these dynamics unfold from afar. Over the past few days, she had silently observed the settlement's rhythms, slipping through hidden vantage points on the outskirts. Her new senses and agility allowed her to move like a specter, unseen and undetected, even by patrolling wolves. She found clothing, a simple tunic and leggings, hanging on a line behind an abandoned cottage near the far edge of the territory. Draped in these ill-fitting garments, she ventured closer each day, eavesdropping on pack conversations. She learned that no one spoke openly of her rejection or rumored death in the communal spaces. If the elders had any knowledge of the truth, they kept it close. If Aric's loyalists whispered about it, they did so only behind closed doors. As for Aric himself, he was rarely seen outside the main pack house, but occasionally she caught glimpses of him. He looked visibly on edge, as though a cloud of unrest hovered above him. A twitch at his jawline betrayed inner turmoil when he interacted with his subordinates, though he tried to maintain a facade of calm authority. Lalia was torn whenever she saw him from her hidden spots. A raging knot of betrayal burned in her chest, and yet an unwanted part of her still felt the bond's echo. No matter how fiercely she willed it away, she could not completely sever the connection that once linked them. That faint pull, like the memory of a phantom limb, tormented her. She had been told the mate bond would lessen if one mate died. However, having come back from the dead, it seemed that the bond was in a strange, damaged state, neither fully intact nor fully destroyed. The first time she laid eyes on him since her resurrection, she felt a surge of ice in her veins, each heartbeat pounding with fury. But instead of attacking or confronting him, she withdrew, uncertain how to wield her newfound power. Every day since, she stalked the settlement's perimeter, searching for signs of guilt or grief in Aric's expression, something to prove he had been tormented by what he had done. There were moments, in the flickering lamplight of evening, that she caught him staring into the forest with a distant look. In those fleeting instances, she dared to believe he regretted his actions. But then, he would step back into the pack house, resuming his role as alpha, the pack's cornerstone of ruthless authority. One morning, perched in a towering pine above the training grounds, Lalia watched a group of young warriors. They practiced close-quarters fighting under the watchful gaze of the beta, Nadia. Each warrior circled, muscles rippling under morning sunlight, while Nadia called out instructions. Lalia scrutinized Nadia with careful detachment. On the night of her death, the beta had shown a flicker of conscience, yet she had ultimately obeyed Aric's order. Did that make her complicit, or just another victim of the alpha's dominance? Lalia tried to recall all the small kindnesses Nadia had offered over time. A sympathetic ear, a swift defense when others teased Lalia for her meek nature. Why, then, had she stood idly by during that final betrayal? Lalia watched Nadia's face for any sign of remorse or conflict. The beta's features seemed drawn and serious. She snapped commands with precision, but a distant sadness clung to her voice. Malia wondered if Nadia held the truth in her heart, bearing guilt she dared not reveal. Still hidden among the pine boughs, Lalia let her nails dig into the bark. She had no desire for mercy from the beta, but she wanted to see if any of them, even one, regretted how easily they had cast her aside. Lalia made her next move that night. After dusk, the settlement calmed as families gathered in their homes. Faint lanterns glowed in windows, illuminating the narrow paths between wooden cabins. She slipped through the shadows, silent as a midnight breeze, until she reached the far side of the main pack house. A second-floor window, partially cracked open, beckoned her. With her heightened agility, climbing was effortless. She scaled the rough stone foundation and wooden beams, then hoisted herself onto the ledge. She listened intently, searching for signs of occupancy within the chamber. Hearing none, she pushed the window open and slipped inside. The room was modest, likely a storage or secondary living space. Stacks of linens were piled along one wall. The faint smell of lavender suggested it served as an overflow area for laundry or bedding. Closing the window behind her, she pressed an ear to the door and heard no immediate movement on the other side. Quietly, she turned the handle and stepped into a dimly lit corridor. Heart pounding, she proceeded down the hallway, listening for any pack members who might still be awake. An occasional murmur or laugh drifted from downstairs. She deduced that the main living area was occupied, likely by a handful of wolves sharing late-night conversation. She navigated the upper floor, guided by memory. She had been here before, delivering clean laundry in her old life. Each step felt like traversing a realm of ghosts, carrying the thread of discovery. But the adrenaline surging through her veins also felt oddly thrilling. It didn't take her long to find the hallway that led to Aric's personal quarters. The door at the end stood slightly ajar, light spilling through a narrow gap. She froze, every muscle tight, uncertain if he was inside. As she crept closer, hushed voices reached her ears. She carefully positioned herself to see who was in the room. Aric stood near a fireplace, the flames dancing across his rigid features, while Nadia spoke in a low tone. Lilia eased her breathing, straining to catch every word. "You're restless, Alpha," Nadia said, leaning against the mantel. "You haven't been sleeping, and it's starting to show in your command." Aric's shoulders tensed. "I'm fine," he replied tersely. He glanced at Nadia with a troubled expression, then cast his gaze into the flickering flames. "I just need more time to adjust." Nadia sighed softly. "I've served at your side for many years. I can tell when something is haunting you. If it's about that night, then maybe talking about it might help." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Lalia's nails bit into the doorframe as she tried to quell the storm of emotions swirling in her chest. Part of her wanted to burst in and demand answers, to confront them both. But she forced herself to wait, to listen. Aric dragged a hand through his dark hair. For a fraction of a second, Lalia saw a vulnerability in his eyes, like a man imprisoned by his own actions. "If I speak of it, I speak it into existence," he murmured. "I acted in the best interest of this pack. I won't apologize for that." Nadia frowned. "The pack's interest, or your own pride? People talk, Aric. They wonder if the rumor about that grave is true." He turned sharply, baring his teeth, a growl rumbling in his chest. "But rumor is none of their concern," he snapped, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of guilt. "All they need to know is that I made a decision. I'm Alpha, and my word stands." Nadia dipped her head, possibly to show respect, yet she pressed on. "I can't force you to talk about it, but I'm worried. You haven't been yourself, and the pack can sense it. Sometimes people need closure for things they've done." Her voice carried a subtle emphasis that made Aric stiffen. Abruptly, he turned away, focusing on the fire. "What's done is done," he said, tone final. Lalia could practically taste the tension in the air. Nadia lingered a moment longer, perhaps hoping he would relent, but he refused to meet her gaze. With a soft sigh, she excused herself and left the room, heading toward the corridor where Lalia stood hidden in the shadows. Panicking, Lalia stepped back and slid behind a tall wooden cabinet. She held her breath as Nadia passed. The beta's footsteps were brisk, but there was a weary slump to her posture. Once the sound of her steps faded down the stairs, Lilia dared to creep out. She peeked into Aric's room again. He was still by the fire, unaware of her presence, staring into the flames as though they held answers to the turmoil that ravaged him. Lilia felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had seen regret in those eyes. Regret, but not enough to admit what he had done. Anger twisted inside her, reminding her of how he had spat on the sacred mate bond. She felt a powerful urge to confront him now, but an equally strong caution urged her to wait. He was still alpha, controlling an entire pack of loyal wolves. She had to be strategic, to pick the moment that would ensure she didn't end up outnumbered again. Stepping back, she carefully made her way down the hallway and slipped into the same storeroom she had climbed through earlier. Her heart hammered as she slid the window open, swinging a leg outside. Before she left, she cast one last glance around the pack house. Memories of her old tasks, the time she served these people with a meek smile, flooded her mind. Now, she was an intruder in her former home, a ghost creeping through corridors. The realization both saddened and emboldened her. She climbed down with sure-footed ease, vanishing into the night. In the days that followed, Aric's emotional state worsened. Lilia, still skulking around the edges of the settlement, overheard hushed conversations. Warriors whispered that the alpha was prone to outbursts of temper. The elders worried that something weighed heavily on his conscience. Nadia did her best to keep order, but everyone felt the tension. The one Sprout Alpha seemed haunted, losing his usual confidence. The more Lilia saw of his unraveling control, the less pity she felt. She recalled the final, terrifying moment when he had allowed the warriors to tear her apart. That memory was enough to smother any compassion that might have stirred at the sight of his torment. She also noticed something else. Near the westernmost edge of the territory, the pack had quietly buried a small coffin. Lilia guessed it was meant to be her supposed remains, an unmarked grave that none visited openly for fear of raising dangerous questions. But one night, as she prowled silently among the trees, she saw a lone figure kneeling at that site. She recognized Aric by his stance. He was kneeling, shoulders slumped, as though weighed down by guilt, his fingers dug into the dirt, lips moving in a silent lament. She couldn't hear his words, but she sensed the anguish rolling off him in waves. Faint moonlight caught a tear trailing down his cheek. She watched from behind a gnarled oak tree, stunned by the raw vulnerability in him. A part of her almost stepped forward, wanting to demand an explanation. Another part of her retreated deeper into the shadows. The swirl of conflicting emotions knotted her stomach. Had she wanted him to suffer this guilt? Yes, she had. But seeing it so plainly, seeing that tear glint in the pale light, stirred a pang in the corners of her newly fortified heart. She realized that despite everything, some vestige of the bond remained. Rage and pity tangled in her throat, leaving her silent. Aric placed a trembling hand on the mound of earth. His voice, though muffled by the distance, was laced with regret. "I was wrong," he whispered harshly, his words drifting in the cool air. "Why can't I feel this bond dying? Why does it haunt me?" He bowed his head. "I never wanted to beg the goddess for anything, but I'd beg her now let me find peace." Lilia's breath caught. She felt the bond's faint echo flicker within her, an answering call to his anguish. But she resisted. Her mind flashed back to the savage betrayal in that clearing. She remembered the cold dread of realizing she was truly alone, that no one would save her. Whatever remorse Aric displayed now did not erase the fact that he had cast aside their bond for the sake of pride. She ground her teeth, nails scraping the bark at her side. No, She would not be swayed by his tears. He had chosen this path, and he had to face its consequences. She withdrew, turning away from the heartbreaking scene. Let him weep over an empty grave, she thought bitterly. It was far less suffering than he had inflicted on her. Yet, when she tried to sleep that night in the hollows of a fallen log near the forest's edge, she couldn't banish the sight of Aric's anguished form from her mind. She dreamed of it, replaying the moment when his tears had fallen onto the soil that was meant to hold her corpse. In that hazy dreamscape, the tears formed a small puddle, reflecting the moon as though it were an eye watching them. She felt the pull of the mate bond swirl around her, stirring guilt, anger, longing, and heartbreak into a caustic blend of emotion that twisted like vines around her chest. She woke in a cold sweat, her pulse racing, her breath ragged. The forest was dark, the soft hum of insects her only company. She exhaled slowly, reminding herself that pity for him was a weakness she couldn't afford. The moon goddess had entrusted her with a renewed life, a purpose. She couldn't allow the remnants of the mate bond to break her resolve. The following day, Lilia decided to push further. She needed more than stolen glimpses of the pack house. She wanted a real plan to confront Aric and possibly expose his crime. Let him face not just the ghosts of his conscience, but the anger of his pack if they discovered he had murdered his mate. Yet she realized that many in the pack might side with him regardless. An alpha's influence was strong, and loyalty ran deep. A direct confrontation might simply place a target on her back again. She needed to become stronger, not just in body, but in strategy. This was a challenge. Where could she train in secrecy? The old version of her had never been taught advanced combat. However, her new body felt capable of feats she hadn't imagined. It was time to test those limits. She ventured deeper into the forest, away from the settlement. There she found a hidden glen sheltered by thick undergrowth. Ancient stones formed a circle at its center, as though it had once been a sacred meeting place. During daylight hours, she practiced shifting at will, flexing her wolf speed and agility. She discovered she had a near-effortless control that dwarfed her previous experience. She sparred with fallen branches and large stones, pushing herself until her muscles burned. She welcomed the ache, forging a bond with her newly enhanced strength. At dusk, she practiced stealth, weaving among the trees, tracking the smallest animals without disturbing a single twig. Each day, she felt more certain of her abilities, as if the goddess's blessing was actively guiding her. But with each surge of power, she also felt a pinch of coldness clamp onto her heart. She found it easier to discard fear or compassion and focus solely on her objectives. That part she accepted as necessary. Her old, timid self had died in that clearing. She was a different creature now, shaped by heartbreak, resurrected by divine power. While Lalia honed her capabilities, Aric's torment seemed to deepen. She still spotted him occasionally, patrolling the forest alone or gazing at that unmarked grave. His features had grown more haggard, and his once commanding voice sounded hollow. She heard from passing conversations that he snapped at the slightest provocation, punishing even minor missteps among his warriors. Dissent quietly brewed. Some believed the alpha was losing his edge, that something was eating him from within. Others were fiercely loyal, refusing to question his authority. Meanwhile, Nadia took on more responsibilities, shouldering diplomatic tasks and handling pack disputes to compensate for Aric's volatile moods. Word traveled that the pack had no official Luna, and the elders were concerned about the leadership vacuum this created. The rumor was that the alpha had refused all suggestions to take another mate, or even consider courting. Some said he was still scarred by the incident with the unworthy she-wolf, though the details of that remained cloaked in rumor. Night after night, Lalia spied on him. She witnessed the spiral of guilt carved into his eyes. She found no pleasure in his torment, but she couldn't muster forgiveness either. Instead, she hardened herself to the sight. She reminded herself of the finality of his betrayal, the dryness in his voice when he denounced her worth before the pack. She told herself this was the path he had chosen. Let him suffer in the hollowness he created. Finally, about 2 weeks after her rebirth, she felt ready to take the first step toward revealing herself, not fully, but enough to unsettle the man who had sealed her fate. Dawn was just breaking when Aric left the pack house on a solitary patrol, heading north to check the boundary near the rocky bluffs. Lalia followed from a distance, her heart beating a measured rhythm that was more anticipation than fear. She was cloaked in a dark hooded coat she had scavenged, enough to keep her face in shadow. She made sure to keep the wind on her side so as not to blow her scent toward him. At one point, Aric paused, scanning his surroundings. Lalia pressed herself against a thick trunk, holding her breath. She watched him sniff the air. A faint frown crossed his brow, as though he sensed something out of place. Then he continued walking. She let him move ahead, maintaining a safe distance. The path led them up a gentle slope. Morning sunlight filtered through the pines, casting long shadows across the dirt and moss. When they reached the summit, Aric stopped at an outcropping of rock that overlooked part of the territory. Lalia crept behind a boulder, so close now that she could hear his ragged breathing. She watched him rub his chest, right over his heart, face twisted in turmoil. Perhaps he felt the bond's frayed edges, the piece of him that recognized she was not truly gone. A wave of raw emotion rolled through her. She wrestled it down. She reminded herself of the purpose of this confrontation: to unsettle him, to let him know that the grave he dug was empty. She took a breath and stepped out of her hiding place. He caught the movement instantly, spinning toward her. His eyes went wide with shock, and for a moment, no words left his mouth. She stood several paces away, hood pulled low, letting only her lips show. She didn't speak. She simply let him see the shape of a woman who should not exist in this world anymore. Aric's jaw twitched. "Who are you?" he demanded, though his voice was unsteady. She remained silent, the breeze shifting the hem of her coat around her legs. She could see the pulse flutter at his neck, sense the confusion and fear swirling inside him. After a tense second, she turned and ran into the forest, silent and agile. She wanted him to chase her, to glimpse the impossible grace of her movement. And he did. He gave a low growl and sprang after her, as though chasing a phantom. She let him trail her, always staying just out of reach, making sure he saw her vanish behind a tree, only to appear further away. She led him through thick undergrowth and across a shallow creek, letting him struggle to keep up. She felt his aura flare with frustration and adrenaline. His breathing grew uneven. At last, she halted in a small clearing, the morning sun catching the Duladin ferns at her feet. Aric skidded to a stop behind her, eyes blazing. "Stop," he barked. "Show me who you are." She slowly turned, her hood still hiding her face. She lifted her chin, exposing just the edge of her jawline. The tension in his stance was palpable, as though some primal part of him recognized her silhouette. She sensed a swirl of sense in the air. His confusion, his anger, his unsteady heartbeat. Her own heart pounded, but she forced her voice to emerge cold and steady. "Why do you cry over graves?" she asked softly, ignoring the tremor in her stomach. Her words were minimal, but they cut to the heart of the question haunting him. He drew in a sharp breath. "What do you mean?" His voice held an edge of desperation. She tilted her head, letting the morning light catch the faint curves of her features. "If something is dead," she said carefully, "why grieve, as though it might return?" His lips parted, but he couldn't form a reply. She saw the chaos in his eyes, an internal war that churned at the mention of the grave. Before he could lunge at her or demand more, she took a quick step back, shifting instantly into her wolf. A flash of black fur and a swirl of leaves was all she left behind as she bolted into the undergrowth. Her speed caught him off guard. By the time he gathered himself to give chase, she was gone. She didn't stop until she reached a safe distance. She circled back to watch him from behind a cluster of birch trees. He stormed around the clearing, scanning desperately for any sign of her. His breathing was ragged, fury etched on his face, but beneath that anger, she could sense fear. He looked haunted by a question that had no logical answer. How could a dead mate, or something resembling her, be prowling these woods? She saw him clench his fists, heard him snarl in frustration. Then he sprinted back in the direction of the settlement, presumably to gather warriors or report what he had seen. Once he was out of sight, Lalia sank down onto her haunches, her wolf form trembling. The confrontation had cost her a considerable measure of courage. Memories of that night stabbed at her, but she refused to yield to them. This was only the beginning. She would not reveal her face or voice fully until she decided the moment was right. She needed to keep him in the grip of uncertainty, to ensure he felt every ounce of the dread and confusion he deserved. Even so, the lingering echo of the mate bond pulsed in her chest, leaving her unsettled. For a moment, she wrestled with the disquieting realization that she had risked direct contact. But she had done so on her terms, in her moment. She told herself that the next time she confronted him, it would be with the full measure of her resolve. She would show him just how strong she had become, how far beyond his reach she now stood. If her presence was enough to rob him of peace, then so be it. Let him lie awake in the darkness, wondering if the mate he slaughtered truly haunted the forest. She retreated to her hidden glen, limbs feeling heavier than before. Though she was physically tired, a grim satisfaction coursed through her veins. She had seen his face, read the shock in his eyes. She had given him just enough to feed his nightmares. It was a small step, but it marked the start of her journey to full reclamation. She settled against a mossy boulder, closing her eyes to let the forest's gentle hush envelop her. The old Lalia would have trembled at the thought of defying the Alpha. The new Lalia was determined to shape her own fate. She would train, strengthen her mind and spirit, and prepare for the day she could truly stand before him without fear. In the meantime, she would remain the phantom that haunted him, a reminder that the goddess's will was not to be trifled with. This was the path the moon goddess had given her, and for better or worse, she would follow it until her destiny was carved in stone. Lalia woke to the hush of the forest at dawn, her senses awakening to the crisp scents carried on the breeze. Over the past days, she had refined her physical skills, delving deeper into her strange rebirth and the abilities that came with it. Her body responded with heightened reflexes, making stealth and speed an effortless dance. And her keen perception had only sharpened. Yet these transformations were not merely physical. An unrelenting sense of isolation had begun to thread itself through her heart, a solitude that set her apart from the world she once inhabited. She perched on a smooth boulder in her hidden glen, the remnants of night's darkness lingering beneath the thick undergrowth. Her thoughts spiraled back to the brief encounter she had orchestrated with Aric. She pictured his eyes flaring with recognition, a dawning horror that suggested, on some level, he realized the figure in the hood could be her. She recalled the faint tremor in his stance when she alluded to the grave. She remembered the swirl of conflicting emotions she felt as she fled, the way her wolf form had nearly buckled under the weight of old pain and new fury. A single question pressed against her mind now. How far was she prepared to go to teach him the cost of his betrayal? The forest gave her no answer, only shifting shadows and the soft shuffle of small animals in the brush. Rising, she dusted off her cloak and set out on another day of reconnaissance. She maneuvered through the woods with the grace of a panther, every footstep perfectly placed to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. She steeled herself for whatever might unfold, determined to keep pressing forward until she found a path that led to some measure of justice, or at least closure. By midday she was crouched within a dense thicket near the pack's settlement. The sun blazed high overhead, illuminating the clearing where a handful of pack members moved about their tasks, unaware of her silent gaze. From her vantage, Lalia noticed a subtle shift in the settlement's energy. Warriors clustered in small groups, gesturing emphatically as they spoke. The younger pack members hovered on the periphery, occasionally shooting uneasy glances over their shoulders. There was tension in the air, thicker than before. She overheard snatches of conversation. "The Alpha says there might be an outsider," one said, voice charged with concern. "We're doubling patrols," another explained. Others whispered about sightings, a silhouette darting among the trees, or fleeting shadows that vanished the moment anyone gave chase. Some voiced half-yoking fears that a spirit roamed the forest, an omen of ill fortune. The pack, clearly, had been told to remain vigilant. An undercurrent of apprehension wove through their words. Lalia's grip on the thicket's branches tightened. She guessed that Aric had returned from his encounter with her shaken, his mind reeling from the notion that she might still be out there. She felt a pang of satisfaction that a measure of dread was seeping into his perfect control. At the same time, she was painfully aware that an entire pack mobilized under his command. If he chose, he could dispatch enforcers to flood the forest, searching for any trace of the intruder he suspected. A direct confrontation in open territory would still be unwise for her, no matter how much her abilities had grown. Even so, Lalia was no stranger to caution. She silently withdrew from her vantage point, gliding around the perimeter. She spotted patrols at intervals along the boundary, pairs of armed wolves moving carefully through the undergrowth. Some had shifted into wolf form, nostrils flaring as they tried to pick up her scent. Others remained human, eyes scanning the terrain. The lines of their faces were drawn and focused, as if they had been warned that a dangerous threat lurked nearby. Lalia suppressed a wry twist of her lips. If only they knew the truth of who that threat really was. She navigated beyond the settlement, eventually finding a secluded rock ledge overlooking the eastern valley. This vantage was less patrolled, likely because it skirted a steep drop-off. Settling onto the ledge, she took some time to ruminate. In her last life, she had lived in constant subservience, rarely questioning the pack's hierarchy. Now, she was forced to confront just how formidable a structure that hierarchy was. The pack had resources, training, loyalty. If she was going to force Aric to admit his deed, or reveal the truth to them all, she needed leverage. Merely haunting his conscience with glimpses of her face might not be enough. She realized she needed information, insight into the pack's vulnerabilities. If she could expose the murder of a mate, an act forbidden in their lore, surely there would be repercussions. But if the pack dismissed her allegations or believed the Alpha's justification, she might be condemned anew. A name flickered in her mind. Nadia. The Beta remained the most likely to harbor guilt or remorse over what had transpired. Lalia had observed Nadia stepping into more responsibilities as Aric's own turmoil mounted. She had also witnessed glimmers of loyalty in Nadia that did not blind her to moral uncertainty. Perhaps a direct conversation, or confrontation, with the beta could yield knowledge. If anyone might speak the truth behind closed doors, it was Nadia. Lalia decided to bide her time for the rest of the day, waiting for night to provide its natural cloak. By twilight, she had circled back to the outskirts of the settlement. She took note of a moderate patrol presence, but she had no trouble skirting them. Their senses might be strong, but hers were now honed to a razor's edge. She detected their presence long before they saw any sign of her, using her gift of agility to melt into the darkness. Eventually, she slipped close to the pack house again, scanning the windows for any sign of Nadia. Through one of the upper floor windows, she spotted the beta's silhouette moving from room to room, organizing something. A single lamp glowed in that chamber, and the hush of nighttime blanketed the corridors. By now, Lalia was intimately familiar with all possible entries to the pack house, windows, side doors, and disused hallways. She hurried to the rear of the building and deftly climbed a trellis. Once again, she found herself at an open window. She listened, ensuring no one else was inside, then swung a leg over the sill. The room beyond smelled faintly of herbs and clean laundry, reminding Lalia bitterly of her old tasks. She pressed forward, footsteps silent against the floorboards, as she edged into the hallway. Dim lanterns lit the corridor, the walls adorned with the same portraits and rugs she remembered. Part of her felt an urge to tear them down, an echo of anger at what she endured. But she forced that impulse back, reminding herself that stealth was paramount. Nadia's voice drifted through a partially closed door at the corridor's end. She seemed to be talking to herself, or perhaps reviewing a list. Lalia approached, then eased the door open a crack. Inside, Nadia stood at a broad wooden desk, strewn with papers and a half-burned candle. She looked weary, shoulders sagging, as though burdened by leadership responsibilities. A wave of conflicting emotions swept through Lalia. She recalled the beta's past kindnesses, as well as her complicity on the night of betrayal. Although fear pulsed in her veins, she resolved to see this through. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Nadia's head snapped up, eyes going wide in alarm. Before she could cry out, Lalia raised a finger to her lips in a gesture of silence. The beta's breath caught, her hand hovering near her waist, likely where she kept a concealed blade. "Who are you?" Nadia whispered, though she didn't sound as terrified as Lalia expected. Lalia pulled her hood back just enough to reveal part of her face. She saw recognition blaze in Nadia's eyes, a recognition swiftly followed by shock. For a moment, the beta froze, her expression stricken. Lalia's eyes bore into hers, silently daring her to speak or to deny it. "You." Nadia's throat bobbed as she struggled for words. "It can't be. You died. I saw it happen." Her voice trembled with a combination of confusion and guilt, heart hammering. Lalia felt a tremor rise in her own chest. She fought the urge to scream accusations at Nadia, instead keeping her tone measured. "You stood by," she said softly, and said nothing. She let that statement sink into the air, thick with unspoken pain. Nadia's eyes shone with tears that she tried to blink away. I was too afraid," she admitted, pressing a hand to her mouth. "If I challenged him, the pack would have seen it as disloyalty. Please, I'm sorry. I never wanted. Yet you did nothing." Lalia cut in, her voice still low. "You have a position of authority. You could have objected, tried to intervene. But you allowed me to be dragged away like a criminal." She paused, letting the memory flash before her mind's eye. The cruel sneers of the warriors, the taste of blood in her throat. "You don't deserve my forgiveness." Nadia winced. "I know," she whispered, eyes downcast. A teardrop quivered along her lashes. "If it's truly you standing before me, I understand how impossible it must be to forgive what happened. I have asked myself every day why I didn't do more." Lalia fought a surge of rage that threatened to override her composure. "Then you know the gravity of what the Alpha did," she said, stepping forward. "Killing your own mate is a crime against the very foundation of our kind. No matter his justifications, he took a life that was bound to him by the moon goddess." She let her voice grow colder. "He might have convinced himself, and the pack, that he had every right. But you and I know differently, don't we?" Nadia's shoulders sagged under the weight of the question. "He regrets it," she finally said, though her tone was trembling. "He's been tormented since that night. You should see him. He can hardly sleep, and every decision he makes is haunted by what he's done. The pack senses something wrong, but they don't know the truth." Lolia's eyes hardened. She felt a twinge of bitterness that the beta tried to plead Aric's remorse as an excuse. "Torment doesn't absolve him of murder," she snapped, voice trembling despite herself. "I was the one left for dead in a grave. His regrets don't erase my blood on the ground." The memory of the earth turning red beneath her throat sent a cold shiver up her spine. Nadia nodded in recognition of that fact. She lifted her gaze, eyes wet but resolute. "What do you want?" Her voice held a trace of determination. "Do you plan to unmask him before the pack? To punish him?" For a moment, Lalia's mind seethed with images of retribution. Aric stripped of his rank, humiliated before his people, cast into the same lonely grave he had consigned her to. She could almost taste that grim satisfaction. Yet another part of her realized that if she brought down the entire pack's fury on him, there might be violent chaos. Some loyal wolves would leap to his defense, others might splinter away. The territory could become a battleground. She had never wanted to harm the innocent, no matter how much anger raged in her heart. "I want the truth known," she answered at length, her tone calmer now. "He can't pretend that nothing happened. I won't remain a ghost at the edges of this land. But I also don't want to start a civil war. Whatever I do, it won't be without careful thought." Nadia appeared relieved that Lalia was not planning an immediate act of violence. The beta's lip trembled. "If the pack learns he killed his mate, they'll be devastated," she said. "But they might also label you a dark omen. Some might think your return is an abomination. Others might rally behind you as a sign from the goddess. It will divide us." Lalia considered that possibility in tense silence. She had already imagined how the pack might respond to her sudden reappearance, but hearing it from Nadia forced her to confront the potential for fracture. "All the more reason for me to find a way to do this carefully," she said. She glanced at the door, then back to Nadia. "I need to know if you'll help me, not to shield Aric, but to help me reveal what he did in a way that spares needless bloodshed." A shadow of conflict crossed Nadia's face. She shifted her stance, her eyes flicking to the desk strewn with responsibilities that weighed heavily on her. "I'm loyal to this pack," she said softly. "It's all I've ever known, but I also see how far Aric has fallen. What he did, I can't defend that. And now, your presence here might be the only thing that can force him to face the truth." She took a shaky breath. "I'll help you, if I can. But you must promise you won't simply slaughter him." Lalia tensed at the question. Memories of teeth and claws rending her flesh crossing her mind. She thought of the blood soaking into the leaves. For a heartbeat, the savage part of her wanted nothing more than vengeance. Then she remembered the vow she made to herself, to become stronger and colder, but not mindless in her wrath. "I'm not here to murder him," she said quietly. That wouldn't undo the past or fulfill the moon goddess's purpose. Another pulse of bitterness struck her as she spoke. "But I won't let him walk away unscathed, either." Nadia nodded, relief and lingering apprehension mingling in her expression. "Then what do we do now?" Lalia gestured at the stack of papers on Nadia's desk. "You're Beta. You have access to official matters, records, maybe the elders' private gatherings. I need to know how the leadership could respond if word got out that the Alpha committed an atrocity against the goddess's mate bond." She paused, exhaling slowly. "I also want you to watch him. I need to know if he's planning anything that might threaten me further. If he's sending out more patrols, if he's conspiring with the elders to find some scapegoat, anything." Nadia's expression turned grim. "He's definitely increasing security. After he saw you that morning, he's convinced there's some intruder. He hasn't outright said it's you, but I suspect he knows. He's not stupid, he's simply denying the possibility because it terrifies him." She hesitated a moment, then continued, "I'll do what I can to keep you informed, but if any in the pack suspect me of treachery, it could go badly for both of us." A quiet tension settled in the room. Lalia glanced over her shoulder at the corridor. She had spent too long here already, risking discovery. "I won't put you in danger if I can help it," she said at last. "But this path is dangerous for us both. If you're willing to walk it, then meet me in the forest clearing south of the settlement in 2 nights. There's a ring of large birch trees there. Come at dusk and bring whatever information you can." She paused, eyes narrowing. "But if you betray me, if you try to trap me again, I will make sure the pack learns every detail of how you stood by that night." Nadia flinched, but she lifted her chin. "I won't betray you. I owe you that much and more." She stepped aside as Lalia moved toward the door. The Beta's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Are you truly the same person?" she asked hesitantly, as though afraid of the answer. Lalia paused, one hand on the doorframe. She could barely recall the timid she-wolf who once roamed these halls. "I've died once," she said without turning. "You can't return unchanged from something like that." Then, before Nadia could respond, she slipped into the corridor. She retraced her route, using the building's architecture to exit through the second-floor window. Within moments, she vanished into the night, leaving the Beta alone with her turbulent thoughts. She fled to the forest glen, the moonlight illuminating the path enough for her enhanced eyes to see. After verifying no patrol followed, she curled up against the base of a tree, trying to sort the tangle of emotions left by her encounter with Nadia. The Beta's stunned acceptance and regret echoed in Lalia's mind, fueling both relief and renewed bitterness. She recalled her own words. "I've died once, you can't return unchanged." She replayed that statement over and over, grappling with its truth. Death had stripped away her innocence and replaced it with a hardened will. Yet as the night deepened, a ripple of uncertainty coursed through her. She realized that forging alliances within the pack might be crucial to her plan, but it also opened a door for heartbreak. She had once hoped for acceptance from these people. Now, ironically, she was working to tear down the illusions that held them together. She wondered if she could carry this through to the end without succumbing to the same fury she decried in Aric. In the solitude of the forest, she found herself staring at the sky, with the moon's pale glow watching over her like a silent sentinel. She thought of the moon goddess, who had breathed new life into her, and she wondered if this was truly the plan all along. Perhaps her second life wasn't solely about vengeance. Maybe it was about transforming the pack, or claiming a destiny that she had once been too timid to grasp. But her heart still simmered with anger, and it felt far more potent than any notion of redemption. The following day, Lalia maintained a careful distance from the settlement. She wanted to allow Nadia time to collect the information needed before their meeting. She also recognized that Aric's patrols would be on high alert after her night excursion, so she focused on training. She set up makeshift targets against tree trunks and practiced throwing sharpened stones or thrusting a sturdy branch as a spear. She shifted repeatedly, testing the limits of her wolf form's endurance by sprinting through undergrowth, climbing rocky outcrops, and leaping over streams. By dusk, her limbs burned from exertion, but she welcomed the strain. Each ache in her muscles was proof of how far she had come. She also pushed her senses, attempting to sense the faintest changes in the wind and the slightest shift in scents. She was rewarded by the ability to detect a deer across a wide clearing and pinpoint a hawk's flight overhead without looking. These heightened abilities reminded her that the moon goddess's gift was no small thing. She tried to imagine how it would change her future if she made peace with the pack. Would she be accepted as some sort of divine warrior, or feared as a monstrous anomaly? That evening, she settled near a secluded pool of water and gazed at her reflection. The moonlight illuminated the face that stared back, a face both familiar and strange, with sharper angles and a certain coldness in the eyes. She glanced at her hands, recalling the moment they had clawed out of her own grave. She wondered how much of her soul had been left behind in that earth. Tremors of old trauma fluttered in her memory, and she closed her eyes, breathing deeply until they receded. Tomorrow, she would meet Nadia in that clearing and take the next step in her plan. When dawn arrived, Lalia took care to find a vantage point near the southwestern boundary. She observed the patrols again, noting their changing patterns. Indeed, they seemed more frequent than before, but there was no large-scale mobilization. It appeared Aric had chosen a more discreet approach, wary of alarming the entire pack. By midday, she spotted a cluster of elders ambling through the settlement, their expressions grave. She couldn't hear what they discussed, but their body language suggested disquiet. She guessed that rumors of an apparition in the forest had reached even their ears, adding weight to the beta's suggestion that Aric was struggling to control the narrative. Finally, as dusk approached, Lalia made her way to the designated clearing. The shadows lengthened among tall birch trees, whose pale trunks glowed faintly in the twilight. A hush fell over the forest, broken only by distant birds preparing to roost. She arrived early, slipping behind a broad trunk to wait. She mulled the possibility that Nadia might betray her. Despite the beta's show of remorse, it was difficult to trust any member of that pack. Time dragged on, and the sinking sun painted the sky in a palette of purples and pinks. Just when Lalia considered the possibility that Nadia would not come, she heard cautious footsteps. Peering around the trunk, she saw the beta approach, cloak drawn tight against the gathering chill. Nadia paused at the edge of the clearing, scanning the shadows with tense eyes. Lalia stepped out, remaining a careful distance away. "You came," she said, watching Nadia's reaction intently. The beta's relief at seeing her was evident. "Yes," Nadia replied, voice subdued. She took a slow breath, then drew a folded parchment from within her cloak. "I have something that might be useful." Lalia bridged the gap between them, her gaze locked on Nadia's face, searching for any hint of a trap. Satisfied that Nadia appeared alone, she took the parchment. By moonlight, she saw official writing, pack records, perhaps notes from leadership meetings. She looked at Nadia expectantly. "It's a transcript of a discussion among the elders," Nadia explained, voice hushed yet urgent. "A few days after you disappeared, they questioned the Alpha about why he was so on edge. He gave them vague assurances that everything was fine, but the elders didn't believe him. They suspect he did something unusual." Her brow furrowed. "They cited old legends, references to how the mate bond is a sacred law, and how defying it can anger the moon goddess. They even questioned him about a rumor that the chosen mate was gone. Aric denied it, said the bond had never fully formed. The elders have left it at that, for now." Lilia's jaw tightened as she scanned the words, though the lighting made it hard to read every line. "So they already harbor doubts about him. That means if I confronted him publicly with evidence, they might be inclined to believe it." Nadia nodded, though her eyes flicked nervously around the clearing. "Yes, but be cautious. The elders won't act on rumors alone, and Aric still holds the loyalty of many warriors. If you reveal yourself, it has to be undeniable. Otherwise, he'll accuse you of being a rogue or a dark spirit trying to weaken the pack." Lalia considered the parchment, her mind spinning with options. "I need more," she said quietly. "Proof of the grave, perhaps. Or a witness. But the only ones who saw me die were you, Aric, and those warriors who obeyed his order. I doubt they'd talk." Nadia grimaced. "There might be another way. Aric tries to maintain the facade that everything is normal, but the guilt is crushing him. He's begun shutting himself away, especially at night. If you can provoke him into a confrontation before witnesses, maybe even force him to admit what he did cod." Lilia's mind leapt to the image of a pack gathering, of Aric's aura clashing with her presence. Would he crumble and confess if she pushed him hard enough? She recalled how shaken he was by just a fleeting glimpse of her. "That might work," she conceded. "But I'd need to be inside the settlement long enough to make it happen." "It's risky." Nadia exhaled, hugging her cloak closer. "I can't guarantee your safety. However, if you time it right, say, during an important pack ceremony or gathering, the shock value might be enough to keep them from attacking you on sight. The next big event is in 2 days, a ritual the pack hosts each autumn to honor the spirits of our ancestors. The entire pack will be gathered." Lalia felt a surge of cold determination. "An ancestor ritual. That's ironically fitting," she said, thinking of how she had practically joined the dead. "Explain the tradition." Nadia hesitated, but then she spoke, clearly and quickly. "It's called the Night of Tithes. The pack lights lanterns around the old stone circle by the western forest, offering small gifts or tributes to honor those who came before us. We share stories and reaffirm the bonds that unite us. It's a solemn but important ceremony, one that draws everyone together, including the elders." Lalia contemplated the idea of stepping into the center of that ceremony, revealing her presence before all. The entire pack would see her standing there, a living refutation of the story Aric had spun. She would be confronting him not in the privacy of a lonely clearing, but in front of every clan member, from the youngest pup to the oldest elder. The magnitude of that risk caused her heart to race. Yet if she wanted the truth to break free, perhaps this was exactly the moment to do so. The effect would be undeniable, and Aric would have nowhere to hide. She gazed up at the moon, letting its silvery light wash over her. Then she fixed her eyes on Nadia. "I will come," she said, voice resolute. "I'll wait until the ceremony is underway. Then I'll show myself. I want you to be ready, because if Aric tries to command the warriors to attack me, I might not be able to hold back. Nadia's expression tightened, but she nodded. I'll position myself near the elders. I'll do what I can to keep the situation from exploding into violence, but understand that people will be frightened. They might think you're a spirit of vengeance, or that you've come to curse us. You have to be prepared to speak to them, to make them see reason. A knot of anxiety twisted in Lalia's stomach, but she remained outwardly calm. I'll do what I must, she said, though doubt gnawed at the edges of her composure. She paused, scanning the darkness around them. And you'll keep watch for any sign that Aric might attempt a different approach? Yes, Nadia answered. He's unpredictable right now. I'll try to steer conversations so you have the opening you need. But after that, it will be up to you. Lalia offered a terse nod. Then she stepped back, wary of lingering too long. In 2 nights, then. The old stone circle, when the lanterns are lit. Nadia swallowed hard, as though she too understood the weight of what they had set in motion. I'll see you there, she said, voice laced with quiet resolve. Without further words, she turned and melted into the forest, back toward the settlement. For a long moment, Lalia stood still in the clearing, listening to the faint rustle of wind through the birch leaves. Her mind raced with the potential outcomes of her planned entrance. She pictured the shock on the pack's faces, the alarm that might flare in their eyes. She wondered if they would surround her, treat her as a hostile force, or if some among them might recall her old existence, her gentle smile, her eagerness to be helpful, and realize that the tragedy they had brushed aside was, quote, real. She walked deeper into the forest, a swirl of fallen leaves under her feet. She felt both dread and fierce determination. In her previous life, she would have cowered at the thought of standing before the entire pack. Now, she welcomed the challenge. Vengeance, truth, reclamation of self. Those motivations pulsed in her blood, fueling every step she took. Yet, as she made her way back to her makeshift shelter, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of apprehension about the possibility of facing Aric's raw power once again. She knew how swiftly he could strike, how mercilessly he had acted under the pack's watchful gaze. Would he be any different this time? The moon rose higher, illuminating a path through the towering pines. Lalia found a quiet hollow where she could rest, though sleep would undoubtedly elude her for hours. She settled against the trunk of an ancient oak and closed her eyes, breathing in the musky scent of earth and leaves. Tomorrow, she would prepare for the confrontation. She would gather every ounce of strength she possessed, physical and mental, to stand unshaken in the face of fear. She would hone her shifting, refine her instincts, and brace herself for the tumultuous wave of emotions that awaited her in 2 nights. As she drifted into a fitful doze, she felt a mixture of anticipation and dread that surged like storm-tossed seas. It was as though the forest itself held its breath, knowing a day of reckoning was near, and that the bond between alpha and mate would soon be forced into the harsh light of truth. The following day was spent in arduous readiness. Lalia foraged enough food to keep her strength, then practiced agile maneuvers in both human and wolf form, testing leaps, rolls, and swift changes in direction. She sprinted uphill and downhill until her lungs burned, forcing her body beyond the limits she had known before her resurrection. The keen edge of her determination propelled her. She refused to show any hint of weakness when the moment came. Night fell again, and she slept briefly, waking before dawn on the day of the ceremony. Her stomach felt taut, as though knotted by invisible cords. This was the day she would finally step out of the shadows and throw down her challenge. She fixed her mind on the promise she had made. "I won't be your victim again," she whispered to the silent morning. "Not ever. She kept a careful watch on the settlement from a tall, slender spruce near the perimeter. As the hours slipped by, she observed the pack gradually gathering around the western forest's edge. The old stone circle lay in that direction, an ancient site where wolves once performed rituals under full moons. Small groups of wolves meandered there, each carrying lanterns or offerings of food and flowers. Children walked alongside their parents, eyes alight with curiosity. Elderly pack members shuffled carefully, leaning on carved staffs. The warriors formed a perimeter, ensuring no dangers intruded upon the sacred event. In their midst, Aric stood tall, a dark cloak over his broad shoulders. Even at a distance, Lalia could sense his unsettled energy. He spoke briefly with some elders, then lapsed into watchful silence, as if the weight of invisible chains hung around him. She also spotted Nadia hovering near those elders, occasionally glancing around as though scanning for any sign of Lalia's approach. The beta wore a somber expression, her tension apparent. Lalia's heart pounded with a mix of grim excitement and trepidation. She waited until dusk descended in earnest, until the pack had fully gathered and the lanterns cast warm glows across the weathered stones of the circle. She could hear the low murmur of chanting and see the flickers of light dancing on carved surfaces etched by generations long gone. A hush descended as the central portion of the ceremony began. An elder with stark white hair and piercing eyes stepped forward. His voice carried across the clearing, steady and rich with gravity. He spoke of lineage, of ancestors who had forged the pack, and of the wolf spirits that guided them from beyond. The entire pack bowed their heads, reflecting on the stories of those who came before. Lalia felt a strange pang as she listened from her hiding place in the shadows. She recalled how she once dreamed of belonging fully to this community, how she had yearned to stand beside them in unity, but that life had been cut short. Tonight, she was an outsider, returning with a purpose that would shake the pack's foundations. As the elder's voice quieted, another wave of chanting arose. Wolves took turns placing small trinkets, tokens, or handwritten notes near a central brazier, the flames consuming offerings meant for the spirits. The flicker of fire illuminated Aric's features. He stood with rigid posture, arms folded, face set like stone. He had placed no token of his own, offering nothing to the ancestors. Lalia saw a muscle tighten in his jaw, as if he was fighting some internal battle. It was at that moment she chose to move. She slipped around the outskirts, using the darkness beyond the lantern's glow to cover her approach. Her heart hammered in her ears. Each step felt leaden and momentous. She inhaled slowly, letting the charged energy of the ceremony wash over her. She reminded herself of the cruelty that had led her here, of the final bite that tore her throat, of her desperate resurrection. Then she steeled herself. She glanced up and caught Nadia's subtle nod from across the crowd, a sign that the beta would do her part to keep hostilities at bay. Lalia emerged at the edge of the circle, stepping into the lantern light with measured calm. Gasps rippled through the gathered wolves. Conversation died on their tongues, and even the chanting faltered. The elder officiating the ritual turned, confusion etched across his lined face. All eyes were on her. She wore a hooded cloak, the same one she had used to confront Aric briefly before, but this time she pulled it back fully to reveal her features. The sight of her face, distinct but unmistakably alive, rendered the pack speechless. Some drew back, uncertain whether to treat her as an intruder, a specter, or something else entirely. Lalia held her ground, ignoring the swirl of fear and astonishment rippling across the crowd. She felt Aric's gaze like a jolt of lightning the instant he locked eyes with her. His entire posture stiffened, breath hitching audibly, She let him see her fully, not as a fleeting shadow, but as a tangible presence stepping into his world. Time seemed suspended, as if even the trees bent in to listen. "Who dares interrupt this sacred ceremony?" demanded the elder. A tremor in his voice betrayed his alarm at her unexpected appearance. Lilia's voice, though shaking, projected across the gathering with a clarity she had never possessed in her old life. "I come to speak a truth that has been buried," she said. "One that must be heard." She paused, scanning the faces around her. Some wore expressions of utter bewilderment. Others looked outright terrified. She saw a younger wolf mouth words that sounded like, "Is that the one who died?" But no one dared speak it aloud. Finally, Aric broke through the stunned silence. "Stop this," he growled. He stepped forward, though he moved like a man caught in a nightmare. "You aren't real," he insisted, though his voice betrayed a desperate uncertainty. "You're a trick, a phantom." Lalia refused to flinch under his accusing glare. "You know exactly who I am," she replied, voice steady. "You tried to silence me once, but the moon goddess had other plans." His face was ashen, conflicting emotions twisting across his features. She sensed anger, fear, and a plea for denial, all at war within him. The crowd around them began to murmur. Some warriors stirred, preparing to close in on her, but a quick gesture from Nadia seemed to hold them back for the moment. Lalia stepped closer, letting her gaze sweep over the gathered wolves. "Did you all believe that a mate bond could simply vanish because the Alpha deemed it unworthy?" she said, letting her voice ring out. "Did you never question where that left the other half of that bond? Did you never wonder about the cost to our traditions, to the blessing of the goddess herself?" The elder hosting the ceremony moved toward her, raising a shaky hand. "Child, what is this? Speak plainly." Lilia's eyes never left Aric. "The Alpha," she said, her voice tightening at the words, "found me to be weak. He declared me unfit, rejected me in the eyes of the entire pack, then took more drastic measures." She drew in a breath, forcing the memories to the surface in a controlled burn. "He led me to the forest. He gave the order that ended my life." An uproar of disbelief and shock swept through the assembly. Some gasped, others cried out. Warriors looked to Aric in confusion, as though waiting for him to refute such a claim. Aric's fists clenched at his sides. She saw the pulse leap in his neck, a sign of how cornered he felt. "That's absurd," one of the warriors shouted, stepping forward. "We never heard such a thing." Another demanded, "Alpha, tell us this is a lie." Lalia stood firm, her voice cutting through the storm of questions. "I fell by his order. I was buried in a shallow grave, and he walked away, believing he had solved his problem. But the goddess resurrected me for reasons beyond my understanding. I stand before you now as proof. Your Alpha broke a sacred law." Aric's eyes flashed with mingled fear and rage. "Enough!" he roared, projecting his authority. His aura flared, making several lesser wolves shrink back instinctively. "You have no right to speak that name. You're an imposter, a rogue playing on superstitions. This is our territory, and I am the Alpha. We do not answer to illusions and false ghosts." But Lalia didn't cower under his aura. She felt the weight of it pressing on her senses, yet she stood resolute. Her chin lifted, her eyes narrowed. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked, her voice quieter, yet cutting through the tension. "That frayed bond still thrums in your chest. You know this isn't a trick." She took one measured step closer, ignoring the fact that warriors stood poised to restrain her if Aric commanded it. "And I know you've been coming to that grave, crying over it, pleading for the goddess to grant you peace. You didn't bury a nameless enemy there, you buried your mate." A ripple of hushed shock spread through the pack. Her accusation was so specific, so personal, that it made even the proudest wolves exchange unsettled glances. Aric's breath shuddered, and for a fraction of a second, his dominance faltered. She saw his eyes glaze with the memory of that hidden grave. She knew how close he was to unraveling. But pride and desperation fueled him, and he turned to his pack, voice thunderous. "She's a threat to everything we stand for. She's attempting to sow discord, to divide us. Warriors, seize her!" Lalia's muscles tensed. She sensed the surge of aggression in the circle. Several warriors bared their fangs, their wolves close to the surface. She felt the presence of Beta Nadia somewhere behind Aric, but she couldn't be certain Nadia could stop all of them if they rushed forward. Her mind screamed for her to shift, to defend herself. But she forced herself to hold back. If she attacked first, the pack would see her as the aggressor. Instead, she drew on the raw determination instilled by her second life. "If you lay a finger on me," she warned, projecting her voice so all could hear, "you attack someone chosen by the goddess to carry this message. My life was restored for a reason. If you want to defy the goddess a second time, go ahead. But don't blame me for the consequences you bring upon yourselves." Her threat gave the warriors pause. She watched them glance at each other, confusion contorting their expressions. Some stepped back, clearly not wanting to risk incurring a divine curse. Others hovered, uncertain, torn between loyalty to their alpha and primal fear of spiritual consequences. The tension weighed heavily on the clearing. At that crucial moment, Nadia stepped forward, placing herself in the line of sight between Aric and Lalia. "Wait," the beta pleaded, turning to the alpha. "Don't be hasty. You know it's her. You felt it in the bond. This is the truth you've been running from." A tremor colored her voice, but she stood tall. "I can't abide more bloodshed. Not when we've already done something so wrong." A stunned hush fell at the beta's open acknowledgement. The eyes of the assembled pack flicked from Nadia to the alpha, stunned that she would seemingly corroborate Lalia's claim. Even the elder officiating the ceremony appeared aghast. "Beta, do you know what you're saying?" he demanded. Nadia lifted her chin, though her eyes gleamed with sorrow. "I was there the night the alpha turned on her. I saw the order given." Her words rang in the hush. "I did nothing to stop it, and that shame has weighed on me since." The eruption of shock was immediate and intense. Warriors cried out in alarm, some stumbling back. The elder looked as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. A few members of the pack turned on Aric, bombarding him with stunned, betrayed gazes. "Is this true, Alpha?" someone cried. "Did you really kill your own mate?" Aric's chest heaved, eyes blazing. He glared at Nadia, then at Lalia, as though they had conspired to tear his world apart. The hush that followed was suffocating. The entire pack seemed to hold its collective breath for his answer. Adrenaline surged in Lalia's veins. She braced herself, aware that at any moment he could lash out. But Aric's stare was drawn back to her face, and for one fleeting instant she saw the raw torment within him, the guilt that had corroded his soul since that fateful night. He turned to address the pack, jaw flexing. His voice emerged strained, but still laced with defiance. "She was never fit to be Luna," he spat. "The bond was a mistake. I acted for the good of the pack, to spare us a weak leader, to ensure we remained strong. I didn't believe the mate bond was true. She was too frail, too timid, and I thought the goddess had erred. A murmur of disbelief passed through the crowd. Aric's gaze swept the assembly, searching for understanding. I protected you from a flawed bond, he insisted. I did what was necessary. And so you spilled the blood of the one chosen for you, Lalia countered, her voice wavering with the memories. You spit on the bond that countless generations have revered. If the goddess makes no mistakes, what does that make your actions? She let the question hang, forcing him to confront it. Aric breathed heavily, all color drained from his face. For a heartbeat, Lalia thought he might break down. She felt a pang of something like pity, but it was swiftly overshadowed by the memory of claws against her flesh. Her eyes stayed on him, unyielding. Then the eldest among the council, a stooped man with a walking staff, stepped forward. His voice was grave, carrying the authority of ancestral tradition. Alpha, you stand accused of defying the mate bond. The Beta, your second in command, testifies against you. And the one you thought dead has returned, claiming resurrection by the moon goddess. He shook his head, disbelief still palpable in his eyes. This is an abomination against our kind's most sacred principle. Is there anything you can say to refute that you took her life with your own order? Aric opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The truth was laid bare in his ragged silence. A trembling hush gripped the circle of wolves, some looking horrified, others outraged. For a moment, the pack's unity teetered on the brink of collapse. Many of them revered Aric's leadership. He was the alpha who led them through conflict, who provided direction. Now, that pillar was cracking under the weight of betrayal. Seeing his precarious position, Aric finally found his voice, though it shook. We cannot allow her to tear us apart, he said, gesturing toward Lalia. She has come back with bitterness in her heart, not the empathy that a Luna should bear. You can all feel it. She's changed, colder. It proves that the bond was never right. Lalia flinched, the sting of that remark echoing in her chest. Indeed, she was changed, shaped by death and rebirth, hardened by betrayal. But she refused to accept the blame he tried to cast. I wouldn't be cold if you hadn't killed me, she answered evenly. You turned me into this by drawing first blood. I'm merely the consequence of your own actions. An outcry broke among the crowd. Some wolves snarled in confusion, uncertain where to place their fury, toward the alpha who betrayed a mate, or toward the resurrected she-wolf who returned with a vengeance. Others stared at Lalia with something akin to awe, as if truly believing she bore the moon goddess's wrath. The warriors seemed torn, looking to each other for cues, while the elders huddled together, whispering in hushed dismay. Nadia tried to keep a measure of calm, raising her hands to prevent warriors from attacking Lalia outright. The entire ceremony dissolved into chaos. In the midst of the turmoil, Aric's aura erupted, a wave of dominance that made lesser wolves flinch. He advanced toward Lalia, gaze dark with a mix of anger and heartbreak. She braced herself, dropping into a defensive stance. A savage growl escaped his throat, and she felt the mate bond, broken though it was, flare like a jagged scar between them. For a split second, she glimpsed the tortured regret in his eyes. The man who cried alone by the grave, but it was overshadowed by his pride and fear. Then, without warning, he lunged. Gasps of horror and alarm rang out across the gathered pack. Lalia surged into motion, her reflexes honed by weeks of solitary training. She sidestepped his initial strike, his claws raking the air. She spun, hooking her arm around his in a move that leveraged his momentum. She slammed him onto the ground, the impact echoing against the stone circle. The pack reeled. For a moment, Aric lay breathless. She loomed above him, her eyes flashing with a fury that coursed all the way to her core. He bared his teeth, the threat in his expression sharpened by pain. "You would attack your alpha?" he snarled, voice rough. Lalia didn't hesitate. "You forfeited that right when you spilled my blood," she replied, brandishing her own claws near his throat. Her heart hammered, recalling how easily he had once given the order for her to die. "No." She held him pinned. Shock rippled through the pack, many struggling to reconcile the timid she-wolf they once knew with this formidable fighter who had just subdued their alpha. "Wait!" Nadia's voice cut through the confusion. She pushed forward, her arms raised, desperate to stave off a full-scale confrontation. "This cannot end in more death," she implored, looking at Lalia with pleading eyes. "You said you didn't come here to slaughter him." Lalia's chest rose and fell, adrenaline screaming in her veins. She registered the quiver in Nadia's voice, the watching stares of the entire pack, the flickering lanterns that cast shifting shadows. Slowly, she drew back her hand, though she didn't release Aric from her hold. She looked down at him, recalling the swirl of rage that had once consumed her. Now, with him at her mercy, she expected to feel triumphant. Instead, a hollow ache gnawed at her. "You thought me weak," she said, her voice just loud enough for the nearest onlookers to hear. "You never even tried to help me grow stronger. You deemed me worthless and threw me away like trash. Well, I learned to be strong on my own, and here I stand, proving your assumptions wrong." Aric panted, eyes wild. "I made a terrible mistake," he grated out at last, as though each word broke off a piece of his pride. For an instant, the entire pack froze, absorbing his admission. "I couldn't imagine a life with someone I saw as fragile, but I see now I was blind." He coughed, turning his face to the side in shame. "Too blind to see what you truly were." Lalia stared, stunned that he would confess so openly. She eased her grip, though she remained poised to defend herself. She sensed the confusion and heartbreak of the wolves gathering in a wide circle. Some trembled at the evidence of the alpha's guilt. Others quietly nodded, as though a puzzle piece had been placed, revealing a dreadful picture. The stooped elder finally found his voice. "This can't be ignored," he said, addressing the crowd. "An alpha who murders his mate is a grave offender against the goddess. We cannot allow him to continue leading us as if nothing happened." Other elders murmured agreement. "But what of her?" a younger elder asked, gesturing at Lalia. "She's changed so much. Is she truly capable of leading us, if it comes to that?" A wave of disquiet moved through the onlookers. Lalia felt their eyes on her, questioning, weighing her worth. The prospect of stepping into a leadership role hadn't fully dawned on her until that moment. She realized that by returning, by confronting Aric in front of everyone, she had inadvertently opened a path for them to consider her as a potential Luna, or at least a rightful mate who might claim the pack's reverence. Before she could speak, Aric struggled to a seated position, face contorted with a mix of physical and emotional pain. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he managed, his voice carrying across the gathering. "But I plead with the elders, and with the pack, for a chance to make amends, if such a thing is even possible." He turned a tortured gaze toward Lalia, as though acknowledging the anguish he had inflicted. "I know what I did is beyond redemption, but I can't change the past." Her chest constricted at his words. She remembered the tearful nights she spent alone in the forest, the shallow grave she clawed her way out of. A swirl of conflicting emotions threatened to overwhelm her. She wanted him to suffer, to experience the torment she had felt. Yet she recognized the fate truth in his plea. Whether or not he could be redeemed, the pack itself needed stability, a path forward that did not devour them in violence. She also felt the weight of the elders' stares, the hush of the crowd as they waited for her response. Summoning her courage, she turned to the Alvas. "I didn't return just to leave you all in chaos," she said. Her voice, though steady, carried a hint of the sorrow that still nestled in her heart. "I came to reveal the truth, to ensure the bond we hold sacred is honored. Whether you want me here or not, I won't vanish into the night again. The goddess gave me a second chance." She locked eyes with the elder who had led the ceremony. "I ask that you deliberate on what's to be done. This pack deserves to know what kind of leader Aric is. If you choose to exile him or punish him, that's for you to decide. As for me, I have no illusions about stepping into the role of Luna overnight, but I will not be rejected and discarded again." A heavy silence followed, laden with tension and the uncertain future that stretched before them. The eldest council member nodded grimly. "We will need time to discuss this, and to consult the ancient rites for such a dire offense," he said, leaning on his staff. "But one thing is certain. You are not a ghost, and your words cannot be dismissed. The pack must reckon with this betrayal." Lalia let go of Aric entirely and rose to her feet, stepping back. He remained on the ground, hunched under the weight of his transgression. Nadia moved close, though she kept a respectful distance from both Lalia and Aric. The beta's expression was a swirl of relief, regret, and lingering awe at what she had just witnessed. One by one, the wolves began to withdraw from the circle, uncertain how to carry on the ceremony after such a revelation. Many whispered to each other, casting furtive glances at Lalia. She felt the energy shift around her, a ripple of caution, fear, and even grudging respect. She had ripped the veil from their eyes, showing them that the mate bond could be desecrated by the very leader they trusted. Nadia slowly approached Lalia, voice subdued. "It's done," she said, casting a glance at Aric's bowed head. "You've revealed the truth. Let the elders decide how to proceed, but know that you've shaken them to their core." Lalia nodded, the weight of it all bearing down on her. She realized she was trembling slightly, the adrenaline of the confrontation wearing off. She took a breath, lifting her chin. "Let them take their time," she murmured. "I'll wait and see what they decide, but I won't be far. I won't hide my face anymore." The beta's gaze flicked to the wounded alpha. A sense of unease softened her expression. "What if he tries something desperate?" she asked quietly. "He's free to try," Lalia replied, a cold edge in her tone. "He'll learn it won't be so easy to kill me twice." With that, she turned and walked away from the ancient circle, ignoring the stares of wolves who parted to let her pass. Each step felt unreal, as though she traversed the boundary of a dream, but she knew all too well that this was reality. The sweet smell of crushed grass underfoot and the flicker of lantern light guided her into the surrounding darkness. Behind her, the pack was left reeling. The old certainties that once bound them were shaken to the foundation. Lalia's existence now stood as a living testament to the power of the mate bond and the ruin that came from betraying it. Whether she would be accepted or cast out a second time, she could not predict. But she walked with the certainty that the truth had been revealed, and that no matter what came next, she was no longer voiceless or invisible. For better or worse, she had ignited a reckoning. Word of the confrontation at the stone circle spread like wildfire through the pack's territory. Within hours, every cabin, workshop, and hunting party buzzed with the shocking tale. The alpha's dead mate had returned. Whispers circulated about the possibility that the pack was cursed, or that the moon goddess had sent Lalia back as a divine punishment. Some believed Aric's claim that she was a malevolent spirit, a threat to the pack's unity. Others, especially those who had privately questioned the alpha's strange behavior in the weeks after her disappearance, saw her reappearance as confirmation of a dreadful truth. The elders convened in an emergency council session that lasted well into the night. Nadia joined them, providing her account of that fateful night when she had failed to stop the alpha's decree. Aric was noticeably absent. Rumor had it that he secluded himself in his quarters, refusing to speak further. Meanwhile, Lalia chose not to linger within the pack settlement. She remained at the forest's edge, prepared to stand her ground if confronted, but unwilling to be corralled or subjected to hostile stares in every street. She had risked everything by showing herself. Now she would see how the elders responded. By morning, an unusual hush settled across the settlement. Most wolves went about their routines, but a strained tension lingered in every hushed conversation. The elders had yet to make an official announcement, and the uncertainty weighed on everyone. Some pack members who recognized Lalia from her previous life began to question themselves, recalling the quiet girl who had always been helpful yet overlooked. They felt twinges of guilt, wondering how they had failed to see the cruelty inflicted upon her until it was too late. Lalia perched on a fallen log in the forest, close enough to hear the faint bustle of the pack, but far enough to remain unapproachable. She had glimpsed patrols searching for her that morning, not in an aggressive manner, but as though hoping to speak with her. She chose to keep out of sight until the elders made their decision. A subtle wariness clung to her, fed by memories of betrayal. Not even Nadia's efforts could guarantee her safety if the pack turned on her again. She glanced at the leaf-strewn earth. Her mind swirled with thoughts of what might happen next. Would the elders banish Aric? Would they demand that she step into the position he had once denied her? The possibility left a heavy knot in her gut. She had never aspired to be Luna in her old life. She had only yearned for acceptance. Now, she wasn't sure she wanted to lead the very people who had stood idle, as she was condemned to die. Yet a persistent voice in her mind insisted that the pack might need her. The whole affair reminded her that the bonds of werewolf tradition were fragile when arrogance overshadowed duty. A soft snap of a twig caught her attention. She shifted swiftly, tensing to defend herself, only to see Nadia emerging from behind a tangle of ferns. The beta wore a cloak, the hood thrown back to reveal a face drawn with exhaustion. Despite Lalia's guarded stance, Nadia raised a hand in a tentative greeting. "I come alone," she said quietly. Lalia didn't relax entirely, but she allowed Nadia to approach. "What do you want?" she asked, voice laced with residual tension. She still remembered the heartbreak of that forest clearing, the second she realized no one, not even the beta, would stop Aric's lethal decree. Nadia's shoulders slumped in a show of remorse. "I bring a message from the elders," she replied, halting a few paces away. "They want to speak with you in council, to determine the pack's future. The meeting is set for midday in the main assembly hall." Lalia's heart hammered against her ribs. She scanned Nadia's face for any sign of duplicity. "And what about Aric?" Nadia exhaled, rubbing her forehead wearily. "He's in seclusion. The elders demanded he remain under guard until the meeting. He hasn't resisted, but he's refused to say much. He just looks broken." A flicker of something akin to sympathy wormed its way through Lalia's resolve, though she tried to quash it. She recalled the sight of him in her final moments, how he had shown no mercy. She remembered the shallow grave, her desperate struggle back to life. And yet she couldn't deny the depth of torment that had haunted him ever since. "I suppose he should be broken," she said, voice flat. Nadia's eyes flicked away, unsure how to respond. "The elders are grappling with ancient laws that haven't been tested in centuries," she explained. "We've had exiles for betrayal, punishments for harming a fellow wolf, that never an alpha who murdered his mate. It's unprecedented." Lalia nodded, the gravity of the situation making her pulse quicken. "And they want me to come? Alone, presumably." Nadia nodded, then offered a faint grimace. "Yes, alone. But I'll be there as well, and the council members will be present. I doubt the warriors will risk harming you after the display at the ceremony. Everyone is wary of calling the wrath of the moon goddess upon us." Lalia stared at a patch of moss near her boots, weighing her options. She could refuse, remain apart from the pack, and let them fight among themselves. But that would leave the possibility that Aric might manipulate the council from behind closed doors. Moreover, it would squander the chance to claim any measure of justice or ensure true change. She lifted her eyes to Nadia's. "Very well, I'll come. But understand this. If this is some kind of ruse, if your alpha tries to end my life again, I will not hold back." Nadia's gaze fell, acknowledging the warning. "Understood," she said softly. "I'll do my part to ensure it doesn't come to that. I've wronged you once by my inaction. I don't intend to repeat that mistake." Without another word, the beta turned and made her way back toward the settlement. Lalia watched her go, a stew of thoughts churning inside her. She didn't trust Nadia entirely, but at least the beta seemed genuinely remorseful, and perhaps determined to seek a better outcome this time. Another hour passed before Lalia rose from the log, smoothing her cloak and checking her meager belongings. She had no desire to appear at the council wearing rags or a shredded cloak. She managed to find a fresh tunic and trousers in the abandoned cottage near the edge of the territory. They were still somewhat loose-fitting, but far better than the tattered attire she had worn previously. She brushed her hair with her fingers, ignoring the lingering dirt and twigs from the forest. Her appearance was no longer about vanity. It was a matter of pride, a statement that she was no longer the timid, overlooked wolf they had once known. Midday arrived, the sun blazing high above the pack settlement. The crowd that had gathered near the assembly hall was tense, parted by a perimeter of guards. As Lalia approached from the forest path, she saw anxious faces peering at her, some with outright awe, others with hostility or doubt. Murmurs trailed her steps, speculation swirling about her second life. She felt the weight of countless eyes, but she kept her posture straight, her face set in steeled calm. The main assembly hall loomed before her, a sturdy timber building that could house all the elders, the beta, and the alpha for official proceedings. 2 warriors stood at the entrance, flanking the heavy wooden doors. Their expressions were uncertain, but they stepped aside, allowing her to pass without challenge. She pushed open one of the doors and stepped in, letting her eyes adjust to the dim interior. Torches lined the walls, their flames flickering against carved pillars. At the center was a wide, circular table where the elders sat. Nadia was on one side, arms folded. And at the far end, under the watchful gaze of 3 warriors, sat Aric. The moment Lalia's gaze landed on him, the hush in the hall seemed to deepen. He looked as though he had aged a decade in mere weeks, eyes ringed with shadows. His powerful frame seemed diminished, weighed down by regret. When he noticed her arrival, his jaw clenched, and he looked away as though ashamed. One of the elders, a woman with braided silver hair, gestured to an empty bench. "Sit, please," she said in a tone that was neither friendly nor hostile, but heavily formal. Lalia hesitated, her instincts warning her not to let her guard down. Still, she complied, taking a seat that placed her in clear view of everyone. The beta hovered in the background, arms still folded, expression unreadable. "We have much to discuss," began an elder with a carved staff across his knees. "Last night's events have thrown our pack into turmoil. Never in our living memory has an alpha's mate returned from death to accuse him of murder." His voice betrayed the shock he struggled to contain. "We have conferred with the oldest records we possess, speaking to every elder who can recall old lore. While no precedent exists for this exact situation, there are certain principles we cannot ignore." Another elder, the same stooped man from the ceremony, cleared his throat. "The mate bond is sacred. To willfully end the life of your mate is to defy not just a personal connection, but the goddess's design itself. This is recognized in all corners of werewolf tradition. Even beyond our pack, it would be considered an unforgivable transgression." He shifted his gaze to Aric, who refused to lift his eyes from the floor. A third elder, a stern-faced woman with sharp features, spoke next. "Despite that, an alpha's authority is also deeply ingrained in our society. Should an alpha commit such a heinous act, it poses a grave question. How can we correct such a violation without tearing the pack asunder?" She looked pointedly at Lalia. "And that leads us to you. You appear to have been resurrected by the goddess. Your presence alone defies all normal boundaries. We are forced to wonder if your role is to replace the alpha, or to punish him, or to guide us in a new direction. We do not know, but we must decide." Lalia inhaled, steadying herself. She felt hundreds of stares on her, not only from the elders but from guards, visitors, and a few braver pack members who had filtered in. "I can't answer the goddess's plan," she replied carefully, "but I won't run from the fact that I have a right to stand here. My life was taken unfairly, and I was chosen to return. That alone tells me the goddess hasn't finished with me." The elder with the carved staff turned to Aric. "You have heard these accusations. You have felt the witness of your beta. What do you say on your behalf, Alpha?" Aric raised his head slowly, his eyes flicking around the circle of elders before finally landing on Lalia. They held a weariness that bordered on anguish. "I don't deny what I did," he admitted in a rasp. A wave of murmurs and gasps rustled through the hall, even though this was not new information. Hearing him confess in such a formal setting still carried weight. "I believed I was protecting the pack from a mate who was too weak to be Luna. I was wrong. Words cannot express how wrong." He paused, voice cracking. "If the pack calls for my exile, or even my death, I won't fight it." His gaze fell to the floor again. "But the pack needs stable leadership, and if I must step aside, then I accept that fate." Lalia's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She found herself stunned by his open confession. Beneath her anger, she sensed a flicker of pity. Regardless of how monstrous his actions had been, it was clear he carried deep remorse. She reminded herself that remorse did not erase his crime. Still, the sincerity in his voice unsettled her. The silver-haired elder cleared her throat. "We have deliberated whether to strip Aric of his title and banish him. In any other circumstance, murder of one's mate would demand such a penalty, if not worse. But we also fear the risk of chaos if we remove our alpha without a clear successor or plan." Her critical gaze slid to Lalia. "Traditionally, A Luna is recognized when she and the Alpha complete the bond, signifying they stand as equals to lead. In your case, that was never fully realized, and now we face an impossible dilemma. Are we meant to see you as the rightful Luna, even after such violence was done to you? Should you stand as the Alpha in his place? A knot coiled in Lalia's stomach. She had never wanted to rule over the pack that once dismissed her, nor did she desire to share leadership with a man who tried to kill her. Yet the elders were openly weighing the possibility. She forced her voice to remain steady. Whatever role the goddess intends for me, it isn't to become a tyrant. I don't seek to punish the entire pack for what he did. She swallowed hard, feeling the entire room watch her every move. I do believe that Aric cannot remain Alpha without repercussions. The pack deserves better. But I am not going to claim a title I was never allowed to grow into, not without the pack's acceptance. The stooped elder nodded slowly, absorbing her words. In that case, we may consider naming a council-led transition. The Beta, or a group of elders, could hold leadership while matters are settled. A flicker of relief seemed to pass through some of the elders. Exiling Aric outright could lead to a leadership vacuum, but a transitional council might preserve stability. A woman's voice rose from the crowd behind them. "Wait," she called. The speaker was a tall warrior with a shaved head, her eyes blazing with righteous fervor. "We all agree what the Alpha did is unforgivable. But are we seriously going to let him off with a mere demotion or exile? He killed her!" She gestured vehemently toward Lalia. "We must uphold justice. Our laws demand retribution for such a crime." The pack broke into murmurs again, some nodding in agreement, others frowning anxiously. The tension in the air thickened. Lalia could almost taste their confusion, their fear of losing the structure they had known for so long. She listened to the rising voices, each with conflicting opinions. Some demanded Aric's blood, others called for a balanced approach to avoid civil strife. A few even questioned whether Lalia's resurrection indicated she should indeed assume the Luna mantle. Nadia, standing near the wall, looked troubled, torn between her desire to see wrongdoing addressed and her fear of what it would do to the pack. Aric lifted his face, gazing at the crowd. "I deserve to be punished," he said, voice resonating in the hush that followed. "I accept whatever sentence the council deems. But consider the unity of the pack. If you try to kill me now, you risk dividing us irrevocably. Some will think it fair, others will resent losing the Alpha they followed for years." He closed his eyes, a hollow resignation etched in every line of his expression. "I do not ask for mercy. I only ask that you choose a path that keeps our people from falling apart." His words sent another ripple through the onlookers. Some seemed moved by his willingness to accept judgment. Others were unmoved, outraged that an Alpha would prioritize order after committing such a heinous act. The elders exchanged glances, each wrestling with the complexities of the situation. Finally, the silver-haired elder turned to Lalia. "You have not spoken your personal wishes regarding punishment. Your perspective must weigh heavily here, for you are the one most wronged." Lalia felt her chest tighten. She blinked, trying to marshal her thoughts. Yes, she wanted retribution. Yes, she wanted him to feel the pain he inflicted. But a part of her recognized that endless violence might tear the pack apart. A memory flickered, how she once walked these halls, daydreaming about the longing, about forging a bond with her mate that could have been strong if only he had allowed it. She reflected on how it all devolved into bloodshed. She stood, letting the hush settle around her. "In another world, I might demand his life," she began softly. But I know killing him won't give me back what I lost. It won't help the pack heal. I see how conflicted everyone is, and I don't want my second life to be stained by another murder." She paused, glancing at Aric's bowed figure. "If I truly died, the goddess's justice might have taken him in some other way. But here we stand in a place where our laws and traditions must provide justice." She inhaled, lifting her chin. "I believe Aric should be stripped of his title. I believe he must live with the shame of what he's done. If the elders see fit to exile him, so be it. If they see fit to confine him, so be it. But I do not demand his execution. That choice is yours to make." A low hum of voices swept the hall, many expressing a mixture of relief and astonishment at her measured stance. Lalia glanced at the tall warrior who had advocated for harsh punishment, meeting her gaze. "Our ways say that for one wolf to slay another's mate is an unforgivable crime," she said firmly. "But in this case, the mate is alive, given a second chance. We stand in uncharted territory. I choose not to let more blood define us." Her words resonated, quieting the clamor. The elders exchanged somber nods. One of them, a graying man with keen eyes, took a deep breath and addressed the room. "Then I call for a formal vote of the council. We propose that Aric be stripped of the Alpha title effective immediately for his willful violation of the mate bond and the murder he committed, whether or not it lasted beyond that moment. Further, he shall remain under close observation while we determine whether exile or a more controlled punishment best serves the pack." The silver-haired elder gestured to another. "All in favor?" Hands rose one by one around the table. Some were tentative, others resolute. Eventually, the entire council offered unanimous agreement. Murmurs and gasps rippled through the bystanders. Lalia felt a surge of conflicting emotion, vindication that Aric was facing a real consequence, a pang of sadness for the illusions she once held about him, and a flicker of something resembling closure. Aric lifted his gaze, absorbing the verdict. He didn't look surprised. If anything, a tremor of relief mingled with his sorrow. "Then it's done," he said, voice subdued. He cast his eyes to Lalia, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I don't expect you to ever forgive me," he said hoarsely. "But I must ask if there's a way I can atone, even in the smallest part. I will do whatever it takes." She regarded him in silence for a long moment, recalling the shallow grave in which her blood stained the earth. That memory still haunted her, and she knew it always would. "Atone by accepting the punishment," she finally replied, each word deliberate. "Atone by living each day in service to the wolves you wronged, if the elders permit it. Atone by never forgetting what you took from me and what you tried to take from the goddess herself." Aric closed his eyes as though struck by a blow, but he nodded. "I will," he whispered. The stooped elder rapped his staff on the floor to restore order. "With the Alpha seat now vacant, the pack must determine our interim leadership. Beta, you have served faithfully for many years, though your role in concealing this crime weighs on you." He leveled Nadia with a measured stare. "Will you accept the burden of leading us until we can decide a more permanent structure?" Nadia's eyes flicked to Lalia, then to the elders. She bowed her head in acknowledgement. "I will do my best," she said. "But I ask that we all work together to rebuild trust. We've lived under a scarred leadership for too long." Some in the crowd nodded enthusiastically, relieved to hear a note of unity. Others still looked hesitant. The shift in power was abrupt and jarring, and it would take time for the pack to adapt. Lalia felt the tide of tension begin to recede, replaced by a weary, uneasy acceptance. This was not a neat or painless resolution, but it was a resolution nonetheless. After a moment, the silver-haired elder turned to Lalia with a formal expression. "And you," she said carefully, "do you have any intention of seeking an official rank within the pack that wronged you so deeply? You were, after all, chosen by the goddess as a mate to the now disgraced Alpha. That bond, though shattered, still lingers in its own way." Lalia considered the question. She stood, letting the hush in the hall settle on her shoulders. "I have no immediate desire to claim a title," she replied. "My priority is to regain my footing in a life cut short. If I choose to remain, I will do so on my terms. If the pack wishes to accept me, and I can see a future here, I might step into a role that benefits everyone. But I can't promise that yet." A flicker of approval crossed the elder's face. "That is understandable. You have endured much," she said gently. "We cannot force your loyalty, nor should we. We only offer you the chance to be part of us again, if you so choose." Lalia's heart felt heavy as she digested those words. The notion of returning to the pack was both tempting and terrifying. She longed for the sense of belonging that once drew her, yet she was acutely aware of the scars she bore. Still, a slender thread of hope wound its way through her anger, an inkling that perhaps she could find a renewed sense of purpose among these wolves, now that Aric's tyranny had been exposed. The council meeting concluded shortly thereafter. Warriors escorted Aric out, no longer their leader, but a prisoner of his own transgression. Some onlookers gawked as he passed, while others turned away in sorrow. For a man who once towered over them with unchallenged authority, the sight of him subdued was jarring. As he disappeared from view, Lalia felt an odd twinge in her chest, neither triumph nor pity, but a complex mixture of both. The crowd filtered out of the assembly hall, leaving only a handful of elders, Nadia and Lalia, behind. The beta approached cautiously, halting a few steps away. "Thank you," Nadia said. Her voice carried a quiet sincerity. "The pack owes you a chance to heal, and I owe you far more." Lalia met her eyes, recalling every flicker of guilt Nadia had displayed since the night she let the atrocity happen. "I'm not sure if I can ever trust you fully," Lalia admitted, her tone frank. "But I see you trying to right your wrongs. Keep doing that." Nadia nodded, acknowledging the honesty of that statement. "I will. And if you choose to remain with us, I'll do everything in my power to ensure you have the support you need." She paused, searching Lalia's face. "And if you decide to leave, I won't stop you. This pack has caused you enough pain." A faint, weary smile touched Lalia's lips. "Thank you," she said softly. She turned to leave, stepping out of the hall and into the bright midday light. The settlement lay before her, its inhabitants reeling from a revelation that would shape their future. Wolves parted to let her pass, some gazing at her with awe, others with caution or curiosity. She felt their stares but allowed no outward sign of unease. She was no longer the shy figure who tiptoed through these roads, hoping not to draw scorn. She was the resurrected mate who had confronted the Alpha and survived. Guided by instinct, she made her way to the far edge of the settlement, near the place where the forest began. Once out of sight of prying eyes, she exhaled and let her guard down slightly, shoulders sagging. Her heart still pounded, the weight of everything pressing in. She had accomplished what she set out to do. Aric's crime was laid bare, and the pack was forced to reckon with it. Justice, albeit in a messy, imperfect form, had been served, yet her future was uncertain. She could try to integrate into the pack under Nadia's interim leadership, forging a new path from the ashes of betrayal. Or she could wander beyond these borders, seeking a fresh start without the shackles of this territory's memories. She recalled the whisper of the moon goddess during her resurrection, telling her that her destiny was not yet fulfilled. But the goddess had not handed her a map, only a second chance. She alone had to decide how to use it. As she stood at the boundary between the settlement and the forest, she scanned the horizon. The old ache in her chest flickered, reminding her of the bond that once might have brought her joy if nurtured. It was gone, severed by violence. But she realized she was free in a way she had never been before. Free to shape her life without the chains of an alpha who dismissed her as weak. Free to accept or reject the pack on her own terms. In that reflective moment, she felt a whisper on the wind, a subtle presence, reminding her of the power that had returned her to life. It felt like a gentle nudge, encouraging her to move forward rather than remain trapped by the past. She closed her eyes, inhaling the scents of pine and earth, letting them ground her. Then she opened them again, a spark of resolve lighting her gaze. She might remain near the pack for a while, observe how they changed under new leadership, see if the illusions that once guided them truly fell away. Or she might leave after a time, seeking a haven where her second life could flourish beyond the shadows of betrayal. Either way, she refused to hide or cower. She would walk her path with head held high. Days slipped into weeks. The settlement endured the initial tremors of Aric's downfall, wrestled with the confusion of an alpha-less hierarchy, and slowly began to rebuild. Nadia oversaw essential duties, with the elders guiding critical decisions. Gossip remained rampant, but new rules were drafted about respecting the mate bond, ensuring no leader could repeat Aric's sin. The pack was battered, but not broken. With each sunrise, a small measure of normalcy returned. Throughout this period, Lalia roamed at the outskirts, occasionally accepting the beta's invitation to attend smaller gatherings or to speak with the elders about the future. She noticed some pack members warming to her presence, their sympathy and curiosity overcoming any initial fear. Others still eyed her with guarded wariness, unsure what her continued existence truly signified. She found that as time passed, she could stand in the settlement without trembling at the memory of her final night. The scattered huts and winding paths no longer felt so suffocating, and in the forest, she continued to practice her abilities, refining the gifts that came with her rebirth. One afternoon, as she passed near the eastern boundary, she spotted Aric from a distance. He was no longer bound by chains, but he lived under constant watch. Warriors trailed him, ensuring he did not flee or plot insurrection. Stripped of the aura of Alpha, he appeared more mortal than ever, a lone figure gathering firewood by the outskirts. She saw how he moved carefully, how his face was etched with sorrow. His gaze shifted, and for a fleeting moment their eyes met. Neither spoke, but in that brief exchange, Lalia sensed that he recognized the magnitude of his wrongdoing. She turned away, leaving him to his labors. She felt a faint tremor of pity entwined with her anger. Perhaps that was the real punishment, to live each day reminding himself of the mate he had cast aside. After a few more weeks of transition, Nadia and the elders called a final council meeting to determine Aric's ultimate fate and to propose a stable leadership structure. Lalia was invited, not as a supplicant, but as someone whose voice mattered. She entered the hall and saw the same table where the previous meeting had taken place. Tension ran through the gathered wolves. Aric was there, guarded but calm. Nadia stood beside the elders, her posture conveying both hope and trepidation. The silver-haired elder spoke with a solemn tone. "We have reviewed the pack's traditions, and we have watched Aric over these weeks. Though he shows remorse, his crime remains grave, and we cannot overlook it. We have resolved to sentence him to permanent exile under strict conditions. He will never again hold a position of power in this pack, and any attempt to return to leadership or set foot in these lands without permission will be met with force." A hushed murmur rippled through the onlookers. Some seemed relieved, others uncertain, but no one openly protested. The elder turned to Lalia. "He is willing to accept this fate, though I suspect his remorse might follow him wherever he goes. We only ask if you have any final thoughts you wish to share." She studied Aric's bowed form. She recalled how she once saw him as the embodiment of strength, how her heart had leapt at the notion that the goddess had fated them to be together. That dream was long dead, replaced by a deeper understanding of her own resilience. After a measured pause, she said, "Let him go then. Let him carry the weight of this with him, and may he never forget the life he once threw away." Aric's voice emerged halting. "I understand," he said, his eyes on the floor. The guards flanking him clasped his arms, preparing to lead him out. Before they could, he lifted his head, looking at Lalia directly. "I know I can't fix what I've done, and I don't expect your forgiveness," he said. His tone held a tremor of raw regret. "But I hope you find peace, wherever your path takes you." She gave him no verbal reply, merely held his gaze for a moment before turning away. She heard the guards escort him out, the heavy door closing behind them. In that moment, she felt the final vestiges of her old heartbreak loosening from her heart. He was gone, banished from the territory. She was free, truly free from the man who had taken her life, from the specter of that betrayal. Silence filled the hall, and then the elders moved forward with their second piece of business, establishing a new leadership structure. After some debate, it was decided that Nadia would serve as a temporary alpha figure, working alongside the council until they deemed someone worthy of the official title. This was met with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. Nadia had her own shortcomings, but at least she had shown the capacity to correct mistakes. In the days that followed, Lalia weighed her own future. The pack, as if trying to make amends, extended invitations for her to participate in gatherings, hunts, and communal meals. Some part of her felt tempted. These were the simple joys she had long been denied. Yet her scars ran deep, and she needed time to rediscover who she was beyond the label of the alpha's rejected mate. If she stayed, it had to be on her own terms, as someone forging a new identity, not as the ghost of a tragedy. While walking alone in a mist-laden clearing one morning, she heard the rustle of footsteps approaching. She turned to see Nadia, hands clasped in front of her. The beta, now interim leader, regarded her with hesitant warmth. "I came to find you," Nadia said. "I wanted you to know the pack has had time to reflect, to accept you in whatever way you decide is right. Some wolves are still afraid, some are curious, and many are apologetic, though they struggle to express it." Lalia nodded, thankful for the sincerity in Nadia's voice, but still guarded. "I can't pretend everything is normal," she replied. "There's too much history, too much hurt. But maybe we can work toward a new understanding. I'm not the same person I was, and this pack isn't the same either." Nadia gazed at the surrounding forest, then at Lalia. "Would you consider staying, at least for a while?" she asked. "You could share some of your knowledge, whatever new insight the goddess granted you. You could help us prevent another tragedy, teach us how to be better." Lalia studied the morning fog, recalling how, not so long ago, she wandered alone, bearing the burden of resurrection. Now, the pack beckoned, not as an adversary, but with a tentative hand extended in welcome. She took a moment to consider the swirl of emotions within her: pain, bitterness, hope, yearning. "I'll stay for now," she said slowly, as if choosing each word with care. "I don't know where my path ultimately leads, but I'm not ready to vanish again. There might be something worth rebuilding." Nadia's shoulders released a small sigh of relief. "I'm glad," she admitted, a soft smile crossing her features. "In time, maybe we can all heal." Lalia arched an eyebrow. "Healing doesn't come easily," she said, her voice measured. "And forgiveness isn't guaranteed, but maybe we can at least find a common road forward." Nadia nodded, and for the first time, Lalia detected a genuine sense of gratitude in the beta's eyes. They stood there for a few moments, letting the hush of the forest envelop them, each one contemplating the tenuous peace that had been forged from the ruins of betrayal. Over the subsequent weeks, Lalia maintained her independence, living on the outskirts, forging her own schedule. Yet she found herself gradually interacting more with the pack. A young mother approached her one day, timidly offering a basket of bread in thanks for returning to show the pack the errors of their leadership. An older warrior, who once trained under Aric, asked for her perspective on improving the way new recruits were disciplined. Lalia responded cautiously, never fully letting her guard down, but she was touched by these small gestures that hinted at the slow thaw in their collective heart. She also discovered that her empathy, though tempered by her new, steeled self, was not gone. She sensed the fragility in pack members who felt betrayed by the knowledge that an alpha had committed such a crime. She recognized the guilt of those who had blindly trusted him. In small ways, she offered them reassurance, perhaps that was part of the goddess's plan, to show them that resilience could follow even the worst betrayal. One crisp afternoon, she ventured to the shallow grave in the forest clearing, where she had once been left to die. The earth there was disturbed, a patch of ground that looked oddly barren compared to the surrounding greenery. She knelt beside it, brushing her fingers over the soil. No marker stood there, just a scar on the forest floor. Yet to her, it was a monument to survival, a reminder that she could rise above the darkest moment. She closed her eyes, recalling the weight of the moon goddess's voice in that realm between life and death. A quiet vow formed on her lips. "I'll live on," she whispered to the gentle breeze. Stronger, colder, yes, but still with a heart that beats for more than vengeance. May my second chance serve as a warning and a light, so that no one else suffers as I did. When she rose, she felt lighter, as though releasing a final shackle. The forest around her seemed to breathe in unison, as if acknowledging that her story had reached a turning point. She might never forget what was done to her, nor excuse it, but she had laid the foundation for something beyond rage. The pack, stripped of its flawed alpha, embarked on its own journey of atonement. And for the first time in her life, Lalia felt a measure of power and purpose, not given by another's command, but forged by her own will. Days turned to months. Under Nadia's interim leadership, the settlement stabilized. The elders set about reforming certain customs, vetting future alphas more thoroughly, reinforcing the inviolability of the mate bond. Meanwhile, Lalia found a cautious acceptance among the people. She sometimes joined hunts, her sharper senses proving invaluable, or she helped the healers gather herbs, her empathetic presence offering small comforts to the injured. She refused to live within the pack house, but took a modest cabin near the forest border, a space to call her own. Each morning, she rose with the sun, stepping outside to feel the cool breeze on her skin. She would shift into her wolf form, bounding through the trees, reveling in the freedom of movement that spoke of her new life. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of wolves from the settlement, but she no longer hid. She felt no more shame in her existence. The final traces of the mate bond's painful fracture gradually faded, replaced by a calmer sense of self. She would always remember the bond that could have been, the man who threw it away, and the sacrifice that had burned away her old innocence. Yet she no longer clung to that pain as her sole identity. She was not just the Alpha's rejected mate. She was herself, a resilient soul carrying the goddess's blessing. In time, the pack formalized Nadia's role as Alpha, with an expanded council to balance power. The Lalia took no official title. She was welcomed at council gatherings, and often asked for her perspective. Her voice, once silenced, now carried weight. Some nights, she dreamed of the moon goddess's realm, of soft, milky haze, and a gentle voice telling her she had a purpose. She understood that purpose to mean growth, transformation, and the shaping of a better destiny, not only for herself, but for those around her. One evening, as she returned from a late patrol near the boundary, she paused at the edge of the settlement. Lanterns glowed in windows, and she heard the faint sounds of laughter from a distant gathering. Autumn leaves drifted on the wind, swirling in a subtle dance across the path. She breathed in, and the crisp air filled her lungs. The future, for once, felt open and promising rather than stifling. A quiet realization settled over her. She had been reborn as a different person, her heart scarred but alive, her strength tempered by compassion she refused to fully abandon. Aric's betrayal had set this path in motion, and though she would never fully forgive him, she had wrested control of her fate from his hands. Now, standing at the threshold of a new season, she felt neither powerless nor burdened by rage. She had found a tenuous balance, and that, she decided, was worth protecting. Stepping forward, she continued into the settlement. The newly woven threads of her life waited there, a tapestry still being formed. Each footstep resonated with a memory of all she had lost and gained, each breath a reminder of her second chance. And if the pack found renewal in her presence, if they learned from her story, then perhaps the moon goddess's purpose was being realized, one day at a time.